What if the most formidable religious stronghold on earth wasn't just safeguarding faith, but secrets? Picture a kingdom of stone and silence, guarding vanishing artifacts, buried tombs, UFOs, and the shadowy tale of a missing girl. This is the Vatican. 44 hectares of sacred ground, rising atop 2,000 years of unanswered riddles. Some are hiding in plain sight like specters behind stained glass. Others are sealed within walls that have never felt the breath of an outsider. Tonight, we're not just cracking open dusty archives. We're shattering the veil over everything they swore you'd never see. Welcome to the most unsolved Vatican mysteries in recorded history. And the journey begins. Now, this is where the shadows begin to speak. If you're drawn to the secrets hidden behind locked vaults and sacred walls, join this journey through history's most forbidden chapters. Don't forget to subscribe, and may your path be blessed with health, fortune, and the kind of luck that leads to truth in a world full of mystery. The true contents of the Vatican's secret archives, just saying it out loud, feels like invoking something forbidden. Beneath the pulse of Rome lies a massive underground labyrinth, a catacomb of knowledge lined with shelves stretching more than 50 kilometers. Shrouded in a silence so deep, it feels like a heartbeat paused. Within its fortified walls, buried beneath divine dust and centuries of spiritual dominion, are the ghostly whispers of saints, emperors, traitors, prophets, and pontiffs. Each brittle slip of parchment is a silent grenade. Each locked cabinet, a confessional for sins history tried to smother. In 2019, the archives were rebranded, the Vatican Apostolic Archives, in a gentle attempt to dispel their mystique. But nothing about this place is gentle. This is not a public library. You don't wander in with curiosity and walk out with answers. There are no guided tours, no selfies, no carefree browsing. Only a select elite of carefully vetted scholars are allowed inside, each limited to requesting a few specific documents, and even then, their access is throttled, filtered, redacted, buried beneath a bureaucracy so labyrinthine it may as well be its own religion. And so the question looms, what exactly lies behind those sealed doors? The Vatican doesn't answer, and therein lies the riddle. Officially, the archive holds a staggering collection: papal account books, secret, diplomatic letters, doctrinal drafts, trial records, and ancient papal bulls dating back to the 8th century. That's more than 12 centuries of recorded history from the world's oldest and most resilient religious institution. But official doesn't mean complete, and in this holy fortress, it certainly doesn't mean revealed. There are chambers no scholar has ever stepped into, sections eternally off-limits, and documents so aged and fragile they could vanish into dust at the mere touch of light. Then there are the whispers passed down, like sacred relics of things darker and more extraordinary. Like a letter from Pontius Pilate, describing the crucifixion in unfiltered detail. Or perhaps the missing pages from Galileo's trial, ones that never saw the light of truth. Others whisper of stranger relics, lost gospels, heretical scriptures, apocalyptic visions, even reports of celestial events no telescope could explain. One tale speaks of a medieval text buried deep within the vaults that recounts an exorcism where a being emerged, speaking of a universe before time, naming stars that wouldn't be discovered by science for 6 more centuries. Another rumor spins the tale of a blueprint literal, not symbolic for a device, said to let the user glimpse the past. The infamous chronovisor will reach that chamber soon enough. But for now, let's anchor ourselves, at least as much as one can, in a place built to unanchor belief. The logistics alone stagger the mind. The Vatican Apostolic Archives are said to hold over 85,000 volumes and 35,000 archival pieces. If all their shelves were laid in a line, they would stretch farther than the island of Manhattan. These records are housed in over 1,000 separate rooms, nestled within Vatican City's fortified walls, with even deeper vaults plunging beneath the Cortile del Belvedere, where secrets sleep under layers of stone and centuries. The facility is climate-controlled, monitored 24/7, and protected by both Swiss guards and Vatican security. Nothing leaves. Nothing gets copied without explicit permission. Even the catalog system, yes, the very index of knowledge, is partially restricted. You might gain permission to study a topic, only to find you're not even told which documents exist about it. Access wasn't permitted at all until the year 1881. That's when Pope Leo XIII opened fragments of the archive to scholars, after centuries of total blackout. But don't mistake that gesture for enlightenment. The rulebook reads like scripture laced with red tape, and much of it still binds. For example, any document created after 1958 was forbidden until the year 2020. That's when Pope Francis released the wartime files of Pope Pius XII. But instead of providing closure, those papers cracked open darker riddles. Did the Vatican collaborate with Nazis? What did it know and when about the Holocaust? And just how involved was it in smuggling high-ranking fugitives through the so-called rat lines? Even today, entire boxes remain sealed. Correspondences are missing pages, chapters, whole volumes. And what little we do know only deepens the suspicion about what we don't. Take the Knights Templar. In 2007, a Vatican archivist stumbled upon a 700-year-old parchment-long, thought-lost the Chinon document. It revealed that Pope Clement V had secretly absolved the Templars of heresy in 1308, completely contradicting the justification for their mass arrest and execution. The real scandal. Not just the conspiracy it confirmed, but the centuries it lay buried. Forgotten. Or maybe misfiled on purpose. What else sleeps beneath the dust? This isn't just a vault of scripture. It's the heartbeat of empires. For over 1,000 years, the Church didn't merely shepherd souls. It shaped nations. The Vatican crowned emperors, sanctioned wars, brokered treaties, censored speech, and silenced opposition. And every decree, every excommunication, every crusade, it's all documented somewhere. And the archive doesn't stop at kings and popes. It holds intimate letters from Michelangelo, Galileo, and Henry VIII, who once begged for a papal annulment so desperately. His failure helped spark the Protestant Reformation. One scroll, called Dictatus Papae, claims the Pope's supremacy over every secular ruler on earth. There's even a letter from Abraham Lincoln addressed to Pope Pius IX. But the juiciest treasures may be those we can't prove exist, like rumored files detailing direct contact between the Vatican and extraterrestrials. Yes, alien intelligence, not in sci-fi within the shadow of St. Peter's Basilica. Fueling that theory is the Vatican Observatory, an actual astronomical facility with twin outposts, one in Italy and another in Arizona. Add to that the chilling words of Jesuit priest Malachi Martin in the 1990s. What is coming upon the earth is so horrible. The Vatican is in full knowledge of it. He never clarified. He died soon after. So is this pure paranoia? Or simply the inevitable weight of scale? Because any institution holding 12 centuries of records, cloaked in power, and obsessed with controlling its own narrative, becomes something else entirely. The Vatican is not merely a church, it is the memory vault of the Western world. And the longer it stays sealed, the more dangerous its contents become. If only in our imagination, scholars fight tooth and nail for access to even a sliver of those shelves. For every letter they're allowed to read, there may be 10 more blacklisted. The Vatican claims this is to protect the delicate nature of ancient documents. That's understandable, but it's not the full story. There are entire index volumes that catalog documents only by date and categorino titles. No, sumarias. Think of it like a menu that lists meat, vegetable, unknown, and leaves the rest up to guesswork. What's in the unknown file? Why is it even labeled that way? The answer might lie in the Vatican's philosophy of knowledge. Some truths are not meant for the many. This idea that revelation is select, that divine or historical knowledge must be protected from the masses. is deeply woven into the Church's history. From Latin-only liturgies to the persecution of translators like William Tyndale, control over information has always been a spiritual strategy. And that brings us to the biggest secret of all. That secrecy itself is the point, because in the end, the Vatican archives aren't just a room. They're a boundary between what we know and what we're not allowed to know, between faith and fear, between light and whatever might still be lurking in the dark. In the catacombs of history, one name echoes louder than any other: Jesus of Nazareth. He walked the earth for just over 3 decades, taught for 3 years, and was executed in less than a day. Yet, the impact of his life has detonated across 2,000 years of culture, conquest, colonization, and creed. His story has split calendars, empires, and ideologies. And while millions take every word of the New Testament on faith, others have always wanted more detail, more context, more certainty. So imagine this. Somewhere sealed in a Vatican vault is a letter, an official Roman record of the day. A carpenter's son was sentenced to die. Or perhaps a diary kept by a temple scribe. Or even a scroll from a witness hidden away, because what it contained didn't fit the narrative later canonized by church authority. It's the ultimate religious X-file, a rumor that refuses to die. There are whispers, always whispers, that the Vatican is in possession of documents that provide greater insight into the life, trial, and execution of Jesus Christ. Not theological reflections, not gospels, but concrete first-century Roman or Jewish administrative records, real names, real places, real decisions. If they exist, they would be the most explosive texts in human history. Let's start with what we know for certain. Jesus was born in Roman-occupied Judea sometime between 4 B.C.E. and 1 C.E. His life and death are referenced outside the Bible by a handful of Roman historians: Tacitus, Josephus, and Suetonius, offering brief dismissive mentions that confirm a man named Jesus existed and was crucified under Pontius Pilate. That's the historical scaffolding. Fragile, minimal, but present. Everything else comes from the Gospels, written decades after Jesus' death by anonymous authors using second-hand sources. The Gospels are not court transcripts. They are theological narratives, written with conviction, but not historical neutrality. They aim to inspire belief, not offer biographies. This creates a gaping black hole in the historical record, one that's never stopped, provoking speculation. Because what if someone, somewhere, did keep better records? Enter the Vatican secret archives, the most obvious suspect. As the institutional epicenter of global Christianity for over 1,700 years, the Vatican has not only been the gatekeeper of theology, but also the curator of Christian history. Popes have employed scribes, historians, diplomats, and collectors. Since the 4th century, many of them were charged with acquiring and preserving any documents that touched on the origins of the Church. If official Roman paperwork on Jesus' arrest and crucifixion did survive, say, records from Pilate's governorship or a note from Caiaphas, the high priest, it's not crazy to assume they would have ended up in the Vatican archive and then quietly disappeared from public access. One of the most persistent legends concerns a letter written by Pontius Pilate to Emperor Tiberius explaining why he sentenced Jesus to death. Some versions claim the letter expresses regret. Others say it was a cold, bureaucratic justification. A few even suggest it contains Pilate's private belief that Jesus was divine, a twist that would challenge every theological stance ever taken about Judas. Justice and the role of Rome in the Passion. There are also stories of documents smuggled out of Jerusalem before the temple was destroyed in 70 CE scrolls hidden by early Christian sects, unearthed during the Crusades, then spirited away to Rome. A few might even date back to the so-called lost years of Jesus' teens and 20s. about which the Bible is totally silent. What did he do? Where did he go? Why did he disappear from the record, only to return at age 30? Was he traveling? Studying? Organizing? Some of these questions are tackled in apocryphal gospel texts, like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Judas, and the infancy Gospel of James. These writings, discovered in Egypt and elsewhere, paint radically different portraits of Jesus, mystical, cryptic, sometimes disturbingly human. The Vatican has long denounced these as heretical, but many scholars believe the full versions of these texts, including others never seen by the public, may still be preserved, possibly in their original Aramaic or Greek, deep in the archives. And then there's the story of the Sibylline oracles. These ancient prophetic texts, part Jewish, part pagan, part Christian, were once considered sacred. They speak of a divine figure, born of a virgin, crucified unjustly, and returning in glory. The early church saw them as pre-Christian proof of Jesus' mission. If more versions of these oracles exist, particularly ones dated before the first gospel, they could fundamentally alter how we understand prophecy, Jesus' identity, and the syncretic roots of early Christianity. But the most controversial theory is also the simplest, that the Vatican possesses documents proving Jesus didn't die on the cross, that he survived, escaped, and lived in obscurity, possibly in India or Egypt, where he continued teaching in secret. This fringe idea, inspired by Islamic and Eastern traditions, contradicts every pillar of Christian theology. It would unravel the resurrection, and yet, stories persist that somewhere in the archive, sealed under papal lock and key, is a scroll or report suggesting precisely that, whether it's a Roman clerical error, a Gnostic gospel, or a traveler's diary, it doesn't matter. The Vatican would never release it, because the implications would be nuclear. Then again, maybe it's not about what happened after the crucifixion, but before. Consider the idea that Jesus wrote something himself, a letter, a sermon, a private reflection. The Gospels show him as a speaker, not a scribe, but he was literate and trained in Jewish law. Is it so impossible that he may have penned his thoughts? What would such a document say? Would it match the teachings of the Gospels? Would it contradict them? Would it be ordinary? The possibility that Jesus left behind his own written words, buried, protected, and hidden for 2 millennia, obsessed theologians and heretics alike. If even a fragment of such a text exists, it would be more important than the Dead Sea Scrolls, more explosive than the Nag Hammadi Library. And if it contradicts the canon, the Church has every reason to keep it buried. But the Vatican isn't just hiding texts. It's also hiding decisions. In 1684, Pope Clement XI allegedly removed 14 books from the official Bible canon. Among them were the books of Ezra's, Tobit, Judith, the Wisdom of Solomon, and others. These aren't obscure footnotes. They were integral parts of the faith for over a millennium. Why were these sacred texts removed, and under whose invisible hand? Officially, it was for doctrinal clarity, yet many scholars whisper of shadows darker than mere theology. These vanished books, laden with timelines, prophecies, and origin tales, threatened to unravel the pristine narrative. The Vatican sought to weave some, even hinting at alternate messianic figures, like ghosts of possibility haunting the margins of history. Where do the original scrolls now rest? If anyone holds their fragile threads, it is within the labyrinthine depths of the archive. Prophecy, too, dwells here, a realm intertwined with the elusive third secret of Fatima, a mystery layered with apocalyptic visions and messianic forecasts, stretching from medieval mystics to ancient astrologers. If Jesus himself foretold his return, leaving behind a cryptic timeline or coded message, would this revelation be gifted to the faithful or cloaked in silence to maintain cosmic order? The Vatican's record reveals a pattern of delay and censorship. Consider the long-lost Gospel of Barnabas, painting Jesus not as divine, but as prophet, foretelling Muhammad's coming, denounced as forgery. Yet whispers persist that original manuscripts may slumber far from prying eyes. But the most chilling murmur is a quiet one. The Vatican may possess not a single, but multiple contradictory accounts of Jesus' life, each a different prism reflecting merciful, militant, or mystical truths. These versions clashed and were silenced at the Council of Nicaea in the year 325, the very convocation that sculpted official church doctrine. Minutes of that council rejected texts and destroyed gospels. If any remnants survived, they lie locked away in a city-state ruled by its own laws, its own enforcers, and its own elusive definition of truth. The Vatican neither denies nor confirms these secrets. Its silence is a deliberate cloak. Preserving divine mystique, the archives act as a metaphysical firewall, a boundary between sacred reverence and scandalous revelation, a vault where history is not only stored but rewritten. True power lies not merely in possessing truth, but in choosing when, or if, it is ever unveiled. This makes the rumor all the more dangerous. If a letter from Jesus, a Roman report, or a heretical gospel exists and remains suppressed, then every martyr, missionary, and mystic who sacrificed for the accepted narrative might have done so beneath a veil of falsehood. Thus, we are left with silence, with hushed whispers echoing through 52 miles of shelving and a single name penciled in the margins of an unmarked box, waiting to be discovered. Yet not all mysteries are relics of the distant past. Some terrify because they are startlingly recent. In 1952, a Jesuit priest claimed to have glimpsed a document describing a solar event at the time of Christ's death, a solar eclipse so bizarre it defied earthly explanation. Was it metaphor, miracle, or something utterly alien to this world? Just as some believe the archive harbors lost records of Jesus' life, others suspect it contains records of life beyond life from distant worlds, other beings unknown. Next, we delve into the unthinkable evidence of extraterrestrial existence and explore why the Vatican might be the one earthly institution that already knows we are not alone. If your mind is already spinning from what might be hidden about Christ's life, imagine what secrets lie just a few shelves deeper. If you're eager to unravel the untouchable, be sure to hit that subscribe button. We have plenty more Vatican vaults to explore. While you're at it, let us know where you're tuning in from and what time it is on your end. Is it midnight in Manila or sunrise in Sao Paulo? Let's map the mystery of extraterrestrial life. It begins with a telescope, a simple round lens aimed at the sky. But this one isn't owned by NASA, the European Space Agency, or any national observatory. It belongs to the Vatican. Yes, the Vatican, an ancient religious microstate founded on divine revelation and angelic visitations, is also in the astronomy business, and not just casually. Since the late 1600s, the Catholic Church has operated some of the most advanced observatories in Europe and, later, across the globe. Today, it co-manages the Vatican Observatory Research Group, known as VORG, from a mountaintop in Arizona, using cutting-edge tools to study stars, galaxies, and phenomena far beyond Earth. This raises the question, why? Why would an institution devoted to the spiritual truths of one small planet invest centuries and significant resources in studying the vast, indifferent mechanics of the cosmos? Some believe the Vatican already knows something and they're watching. In the deepest reaches of Vatican secrecy, buried far beneath St. Peter's Basilica, behind fortified steel doors and dust-covered shelves, there are said to be documents that deal not with saints or sinners, but with something far stranger beings. Encounters, records of celestial visitations, UFO sightings, and even possible communication with life beyond this planet. It sounds like the stuff of tinfoil hat fantasies until you consider the Church's own surprising openness to the idea In 2008, Father José Gabriel Funes, then head of the Vatican Observatory, made headlines when he declared that belief in extraterrestrials does not contradict faith in God. He went further, stating that just as there is a variety of creatures on Earth, there could be other beings, even intelligent ones, created by God. He called them our brothers. This was no rogue priest. This was the official scientific voice of the Vatican. And it wasn't the first time. For decades, the Vatican has performed a careful, cryptic dance around the topic of alien life, never confirming, never denying, but always leaving the door slightly ajar. This has fueled generations of theories, rumors, and high-stakes speculation. What if the Vatican isn't just philosophically open to alien life, but already knows it exists? The theory suggests that over the centuries, the Vatican has collected not only sacred texts, but also strange ones. Reports from missionaries in the Americas, Africa, and Asia who saw objects in the sky that defied natural explanation. Medieval sketches of angelic visitations that, upon closer look, resemble modern descriptions of extraterrestrial contact. Ancient depictions of flying chariots and burning wheels. Even pre-Christian documents preserved by the Church that speak of star beings descending from the heavens. Each report is cataloged. Each drawing preserved not because they were believed at the time, but because someone thought they might matter later. The Vatican, as an institution, thinks in terms of centuries. If its archives contain evidence or suspicion of non-human intelligence, it would explain the Church's obsessive cataloging of the cosmos. It would also explain the unusually high number of astronomers and astrophysicists employed by a religious body. They're not searching for proof. They're monitoring a known variable. Let's return to the telescope. One of the Vatican's most advanced observatories, the Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope, or VAT, sits on Mount Graham in Arizona, a site the local Apache considers sacred, linked in their traditions to the appearance of star people. The location was controversial, not only for spiritual reasons, but also for environmental ones. Yet the Vatican insisted on it. Why? What was so critical about that mountain? Then, there's the telescope with the strangest name in the Vatican's possession, Lucifer. Technically, it's an acronym. Large Binocular Telescope, Near-Infrared Utility, with camera and integral field unit for extragalactic research. But the choice of name, especially by a religious institution, is provocative. Lucifer, the light-bearer, the fallen angel, the first to challenge divine authority. Why name a telescope after him, unless the point isn't just science, it's revelation? If intelligent life exists beyond Earth, it poses a monumental theological challenge. Was Jesus incarnated for all sentient beings, or just humanity? Do aliens have souls? Do they sin? Is there an alien version of the Bible? Of salvation? Of divine justice? These aren't idle questions. Vatican theologians have been grappling with them for decades. Theological journals have published articles with titles like Christology and the Cosmos and Salvation and the Extraterrestrial. Entire panels have been convened to discuss whether baptism would be necessary for non-human entities, which suggests, at the very least, a serious expectation that contact could happen. Now imagine that expectation is based on classified knowledge documents from centuries past, artifacts, eyewitness accounts, or even evidence of a cover-up. The modern UFO phenomenon, born in the wake of World War II, has always been cloaked in military secrecy. But even before Roswell, the Vatican had records of strange sky events. In 1561, residents of Nuremberg, Germany, reported an aerial battle involving flying spheres and cylinders, witnessed by hundreds. The event was chronicled in broadsheet newspapers, preserved in the Vatican Library. A similar event occurred in Basel, Switzerland, in 1566. What did the Church make of these? Nothing officially, but the records were kept, filed, stored. Even in our own century, the Vatican appears to be watching. In 2007, An orange disk was reportedly seen hovering above the Vatican, witnessed by multiple observers, and even caught on video. The footage, predictably, vanished. The Vatican issued no statement, no denial, just silence. And silence in this context is telling because the Church doesn't usually ignore signs from the heavens. Comets, eclipses, and blood moons have played massive roles in religious prophecy and interpretation. But this was different. This wasn't a celestial event. It was something else, entirely. So, what does the archive hold, if even a fraction of these rumors are true? It may contain records of pre-modern sightings, categorized as miracles or angelic appearances, missionary reports from remote regions describing sky vessels or non-human beings, secret Vatican correspondence about observed aerial phenomena, astronomical data from observatories indicating artificial movement of celestial bodies, transcripts of supposed contact events, or theological evaluations on the status of extraterrestrial souls. Some even believe there are physical artifacts, metallic fragments, alien script, something found perhaps during one of the Crusades, hidden, not because of danger, but because of its implications. It makes sense. The Vatican is the single most powerful religious institution on the planet. Its job is not only to protect the faith, but to interpret reality through the lens of that faith. If we're not alone, and the public finds out first, theology loses control. But if the Vatican already knows and manages the revelation, they stay in charge. In this light, Vatican secrecy is not obstruction, it's strategy. There's another possibility, one even darker. What if the Vatican isn't just studying extraterrestrials, but communicating with them? Let that sink in. The idea, wild as it sounds, has roots in both fringe science and fringe theology. In the 1990s, a document surfaced online claiming to be from an internal Vatican source. It spoke of a program called Civis Servitio Informi Vaticana, a kind of black ops intelligence agency operating within the Church, tasked with intercepting and evaluating alien communication. The document was quickly discredited, but like all good disinformation, it raised just enough plausible doubt. Here's the truth. The Vatican has always had its own intelligence network, its own diplomatic corps, its own global communication lines. If contact were to happen, who better to receive it and conceal it? Theologically, it even fits. The Church believes in non-corporeal beings, angels, demons, spirits. What's one more category? Especially if it comes from the stars. Some ancient Christian mystics even wrote of beings, neither divine nor human, born of fire and light, watchers in the heavens. Those ancient writings were exiled from canon, but they weren't destroyed. They were archived somewhere deep in the maze of shelves, locked behind keys and whispered names. Those texts wait. The Vatican won't confirm their existence, of course, but they don't need to. Their silence speaks volumes. Their observatories gaze skyward. Their archives point inward. And one day, perhaps soon, those two paths will collide. But before we search the stars for hidden beings, maybe we should look beneath our feet. Beneath the marble and grandeur of St. Peter's Basilica lies a secret, far older than UFO sightings. Older even than the church itself. A burial site, a necropolis, a city of the dead. At its heart lies one tomb in particular, which the Vatican claims is the final resting place of the Apostle Peter. The truth of that claim is as mysterious and controversial as the tomb itself. Next, we descend into the ancient crypts of Rome to uncover the eerie, unresolved mystery of St. Peter's tomb and the Vatican necropolis. The Vatican necropolis and St. Peter's tomb, long before marble domes and Swiss guards, before popes in white and pilgrims in khaki shorts. The Vatican was a graveyard, not metaphorically, but a literal graveyard. A Roman necropolis lies buried deep beneath what is now St. Peter's Basilica, an ancient city of the dead, carved into the earth like veins into bone. At its supposed center is a single tomb, modest, weathered, inscribed with one of the most disputed names in Christian history, Peter, as in St. Peter, the Apostle, the Rock, the man Jesus allegedly chose to build his church, the first pope crucified upside down in Rome, according to tradition, and buried in secret by a few loyal followers. That's the story. At least, but in a place like the Vatican, stories aren't just stories, they're foundations. The bedrock upon which 1,300,000,000 Catholics stand for centuries. One question has haunted the church like a ghost in the catacombs. Is that really Peter down there? The Vatican has always said yes. Unequivocally, the faith of the church rests, quite literally, atop that assumption, St. Peter's Basilica. Arguably, the most iconic building in Christendom, was constructed in the 4th century over what Emperor Constantine was told was the apostles' burial site, but for over 1,600 years, no one checked, no one dared, until the 20th century. It was 1939. Pope Pius XI had died, and his successor, Pius XII, wanted him entombed in the Vatican grotto beneath St. Peter's Basilica. During the excavation, workers accidentally uncovered an unexpected series of ancient tombs, walls, chambers, and inscriptions, an entire necropolis, untouched for centuries, hidden just a few feet below the foot traffic of tourists and clergy. Suddenly, the question wasn't hypothetical anymore. The Vatican had a mystery on its hands. What they had stumbled upon was the ancient Vatican necropolis, a sprawling underground cemetery dating back to the 1st century of the Common Era. It was a place where Roman nobles were buried, far outside the sacred perimeter of the city boundary, where corpses were forbidden. It contained elaborate tombs, rich with inscriptions and pagan iconography. But among them was something different. A modest grave, unadorned, pressed against an ancient red wall. The red wall. This tomb drew the most attention, partly because of its location directly beneath the high altar of St. Peter's Basilica, and partly because of what was scratched on the adjacent graffiti wall, "Peter is here." Just 3 words, or perhaps one miracle. But from the start, the evidence was messy. The remains inside the tomb, if there were any, had been disturbed long ago. Some bones had been moved, others lost. The archaeologists faced immense pressure. Solve the greatest mystery in Catholic history without undermining the most sacred claim of Catholicism. Not an easy task. The Vatican kept the excavation secret for a decade. Only in 1950 did Pope Pius XII go public, announcing that the tomb of St. Peter had at last been identified. But even then, no bones were shown, no photographs, released just a declaration cloaked in papal authority. Behind the scenes, the situation was far murkier. The original tomb beneath the red wall had no name inscribed, no bones conclusively linked to Peter. The nearby graffiti wall bore the word Petro, yes, but not as a formal epitaph, more like a scrawled prayer, a devotion, not documentation. The bones found in a nearby niche didn't even match the demographics. They were later revealed to belong to multiple individuals, some not male, some not from the right era. Then came the twist. In 1952, a box of bones, previously dismissed and stored in a marble-lined wall near the supposed tomb, was re-examined. These were different. One skeleton, a man, 60 to 70 years old, tall, robust, and crucially, missing the feet. Why does that matter? Because early Christian tradition claims Peter was crucified upside down, unlike standard Roman crucifixions, where the condemned were nailed through wrists and ankles. Upside-down executions often involved cutting the body down at the knees or ankles. Post-mortem, the absence of feet matched the story finally. Something fit. The bones were examined by Margherita Guarducci, a renowned archaeologist and epigrapher, who argued passionately, yet controversially, that these were indeed the relics of St. Peter. She claimed they matched the right age, era, and location. She wasn't just guessing. She pointed to traces of ancient purple and gold cloth, imperial colors of Rome, found with the bones. She noted the niche where they were hidden had been deliberately protected, sealed, and venerated. She even linked microscopic soil samples to the precise geography of the Vatican Hill, suggesting the remains had never been moved. Pope Paul VI agreed. In 1968, he officially declared the bones identified in a way that we can hold to be convincing. Then, silence. The bones were placed in a plexiglass case, hidden again deep below the basilica. Convincing, not proven, and certainly not public. The scientific community remains divided. Some archaeologists accept the findings as probable, others call it wishful thinking, wrapped in liturgical need. Confirmation bias runs deep when the tomb's location supports the legitimacy of the church itself. This raises a deeper question. What if they're wrong? What if the Vatican has built its spiritual empire on a case of mistaken identity? Worse, what if the bones are real but contradict the traditional story? There are whispers. Of course, there always are. Some say the tested bones showed signs of burial rituals inconsistent with Christian customs. Others suggest the surrounding tomb inscriptions, many damaged or erased during the excavations, spoke not of Christian martyrs, but of pagan cults. A few conspiracy-minded critics even propose the Vatican discovered something heretical beneath the basilica, something that fundamentally undermines the apostolic succession and was sealed away under a theological quarantine. After all, the site was sacred to pagans long before Christians claimed it. The Vatican Hill wasn't just a burial ground. It was home to an ancient pagan shrine where Roman families brought offerings and honored ancestors. It's entirely possible the grave identified as Peter's belonged to a revered nobleman or a priest of Mithras long before Christianity arrived. Here's the genius of the Vatican's handling of the tomb. They control the evidence. The bones aren't in a museum. The graffiti wall isn't open for public examination, and access to the necropolis is granted to only a select few under heavy surveillance. Even scholars permitted to study the site must do so under strict conditions. No photographs. No independent testing. The Church maintains final say over what is seen and what is believed. Faith, after all, thrives in mystery. But this isn't just about bones. It's about the architecture of belief. St. Peter's Basilica, built in the 4th century, demolished and rebuilt in the 16th, stands as the central monument to Peter's authority, his martyrdom, and the idea that the church is built literally and symbolically upon his body. If the tomb is proven false, what happens to the metaphor, to the institution that metaphor empowers? Perhaps the most chilling question is this: what else was found down there? Excavation records are incomplete. Some logs are missing. And in interviews, early archaeologists hinted at unusual findings deemed irrelevant to the theological objective of the excavation. What does that mean? In a city layered with millennia of history, almost anything is possible. One legend claims a sealed chamber was discovered among the sarcophagi, containing non-Christian relics, possibly even scrolls. Another rumor speaks of a hidden staircase descending deeper into the rock, leading to a forgotten Roman temple. Some claim it still exists. Others believe it was quietly bricked up. The Vatican offers no comment. They have what they need: a tomb, a tradition, a story strong enough to build a religion on. Whether it's true is secondary. What matters is that it's believed. For those seeking hard archaeological truth, the necropolis remains a riddle, wrapped in incense. You can visit it technically. You can apply for a tour, strictly supervised, led through narrow, humid corridors beneath the basilica. You'll see tombs, frescoes, the red wall, maybe even a glimpse of the plexiglass case holding the bones, but not the bones themselves, not the DNA tests, not the carbon dating reports. Those are sealed, held in the archive. So maybe the better question isn't, is this really Peter? But why are they so afraid? We'll find out if the answer is yes. If those are truly the remains of the first pope, it's a triumph of faith, confirmed by fact. But if the answer is no, it's not just a tomb, it's a trapdoor. Beneath it lies a deeper chamber of secrets, waiting to be unlocked. Because St. Peter's bones are just the beginning. Next, we push beyond the tombs into the shadows of the past, into a story so strange. It sounds like a religious fever dream, but it actually happened. The 9th century, ad pope, a living pope, and a courtroom where the corpse was the defendant. It's called the Cadaver Synod, the most grotesque trial in the Vatican's long and twisted history. In the dim-lit chambers of Vatican history, lined with tales of martyrs, mystics, and miracles, there exists one moment, so grotesque, so absurd, so apocalyptically bizarre that it reads less like theology and more like satire penned by a lunatic playwright. But it happened, all of it. Rome. The year is 897. The Church, long seen as the anchor of moral clarity, is adrift in a sea of corruption, violence, and paranoia. Popes are not spiritual shepherds, but political weapons. The papal throne changes hands like a cursed crown, often stained with blood, always shadowed by scandal. Into this whirlwind of ecclesiastical chaos steps one of the most macabre spectacles in all of human history. A pope is put on trial. Not just any pope, a dead one. This is the Cadaver Synod, a horror in Latin, an event so surreal, so theatrically grotesque, that it continues to stagger historians, theologians, and readers over 1,000 years later when Pope Stephen VI ascended to power. He wasn't content to merely discredit his predecessor, Formosus. He had Pope Formosus, dead for 9 months, dug up, dressed in papal vestments, and dragged into a courtroom to stand trial for crimes against the Church. The charges: perjury, ambition, illegally assuming the papacy. The defense: a literal corpse. Let's rewind. Pope Formosus was a controversial figure even while alive. Born around 816, he climbed the ranks of the Church with unrelenting ambition. A skilled diplomat, he was sent on missions to Bulgaria and France. He was intelligent, respected, even feared. But his political maneuvers often made enemies, especially among rival factions, vying for control of Rome. In that era, the papacy was less about spiritual guidance and more about political leverage. Italian noble families, Frankish kings, and Roman warlords treated the Vatican like a chessboard. Formosus was a bishop who refused to play by their rules. He aligned with powerful foreign leaders like Arnulf of Carinthia, whom he crowned Holy Roman Emperor in 896. This infuriated the rival Spoleto family, who saw themselves as the rightful rulers of Italy. When Formosus died in 896, likely of natural causes, though even that remains disputed, his enemies waited. Less than a year later, they struck. Enter Pope Stephen VI, a puppet of the Spoletos. Stephen was installed on the throne with one job: erase Formosus from history. Not figuratively, but literally. What followed was a public spectacle of such medieval madness that it defies belief. The corpse of Formosus was exhumed rotting, reeking, barely held together. He was dressed in the full regalia of the papacy robes: mitre, pallium. Seated on a throne inside the Lateran Basilica, his skeletal fingers were threaded with rings, his skull tilting at an unnatural angle, framed by a crown of worms. Across from him, Stephen VI sat in judgment. Red-faced and trembling with rage, a deacon stood beside the cadaver to speak on its behalf. Like a reverse ventriloquist, the courtroom was packed with clergy, soldiers, and spectators, some praying, some jeering, all caught in the gravitational pull of this ecclesiastical horror show. Stephen launched into a tirade, accusing the dead pope of violating canon law by becoming Bishop of Rome while still holding the See of Porto. He ranted that Formosus had conspired against previous popes, usurped divine authority, and that his every act as pontiff, every ordination, every declaration was invalid. Then came the sentence. The trial concluded with Formosus found guilty. His papacy was declared null. His corpse was stripped of its sacred vestments, the 3 fingers of benediction on his right hand, severed symbolically, silencing his spiritual authority. The body was dragged from the basilica, flung into a common grave, then later exhumed again and dumped into the Tiber River. Apope exhumit, tried, mutilated, discarded like trash. This wasn't a secret ritual, whispered in shadows. This was public, oficial, liturgical, insanity, a desecration of the dead. So violent, so theatrical, that it still chills the spine of anyone who stumbles across the story. Yet perhaps the most disturbing part is this. It almost made sense. In the 9th century, the papacy was a weapon, and the church was being torn apart by warlords and dynasties who saw Rome not as sacred ground, but as the ultimate prize. Formosus ad enemies. Dos enemies had power, and in a world without accountability, Stephen VI decided that one man's bones could be put on trial to rewrite an entire era of spiritual authority. But Stephen miscalculated. The cadaver synod shocked even medieval Rome. The desecration of a pope, no matter how controversial, was too much. The public, who had once cheered or jeered, now recoiled. Riots broke out. Clergy rebelled. Within months, Stephen VI was imprisoned. According to chroniclers, he was strangled to death in his cell, either by outraged monks or a faction loyal to Formosus. The corpse had outlived its accuser. After Stephen's death, a rapid backpedal began. The next pope annulled the cadaver synod. Then another pope reversed that annulment. The church twisted and contorted, trying to erase the stain from history while preserving its institutional authority. It became a theological game of whack-a-mole, with each pope either condemning or condoning the madness, depending on which family held the reins of power. Even the body of Formosus was caught in the ping-pong. After being fished out of the Tiber by a sympathetic monk, his remains were reburied in the basilica. A few years later, they were moved again and again, like a cursed relic. The cadaver refused to stay still, an eternal reminder that no pope is ever truly safe from the whims of his successors. What's perhaps most chilling is how little has changed. At its core, the cadaver synod is about control of memory, of legacy, of truth. The dead cannot defend themselves, but their reputations can still be weaponized. It's tempting to laugh at the absurdity. A courtroom with a corpse as the defendant, a deacon whispering into a skull. But beneath the horror lies something darker. The idea that authority can't just erase the past, it can reconstruct it. History isn't written by the victors. It's rewritten by the survivors. The cadaver synod wasn't an aberration. It was a mirror, a moment when the church showed its teeth, when robes became armor, when dogma became theater, and when the corpse of a pope became a puppet for vendetta. In the centuries that followed, the church tried to bury the event again and again. It was absent from early histories, downplayed in theological chronicles, treated as an embarrassing footnote, but it never truly disappeared. You don't forget the time the Vatican put a dead pope on trial. You don't forget the image of decayed hands raised in forced contrition. You don't forget that the tombs are not always for the dead, that sometimes the dead are summoned not for reverence, but for revenge. Today, the cadaver synod exists in the shadows of Catholic history, from a time when faith was wielded like a dagger. But its spirit lives on in every sealed document, every suppressed archive, every version of the truth edited for convenience. Sometimes the church doesn't just silence the dead. Sometimes it speaks through them. For all its grotesque spectacle, the cadaver synod is just one body in a graveyard of secrets. While Formosus was exhumed for political purposes, another legend suggests the Vatican has long harbored a secret about an entire papacy that never officially existed, the papacy of a woman. A legend so persistent, so blasphemously seductive, that even today, the Vatican refuses to acknowledge its possibility. Next, we explore the myth, the scandal, and the mystery of Pope Joan, the woman who may have sat on the throne of St. Peter, only to be erased from history by the very institution she led. Then, the disappearance of Emanuela Orlandi, a girl who vanished without a trace in the heart of the world's smallest country, surrounded by marble saints and bulletproof glass, not from a dark alley or some anonymous city block, but from Vatican City, the very epicenter of the Catholic Church, a place presumed to be one of the most secure and sacred sites on earth. Her name was Emanuela Orlandi. She was 15 years old, a citizen of Vatican City, the daughter of a mid-level employee in the prefecture of the papal household. She lived in an apartment just inside the Vatican walls, in a building owned by the church. Her life was quiet, routine, private until one afternoon in 1983. She walked out of her music class in Rome and was never seen again. No body, no crime scene, no closure, only silence. From that silence, 1,000 questions were born, none of them answered. The disappearance of Emanuela Orlandi is more than a cold case. It's a labyrinth, a swirling vortex of conspiracy, cover-up, and confusion, where each new clue opens into a deeper chamber of secrets. Over 4 decades later, it remains one of the Vatican's most disturbing unsolved mysteries, not just because of what might have happened, but because of what still hasn't been said. Let's rewind to the beginning. It was the 22nd of June, 1983. Emanuela left home around 3:30 in the afternoon to attend her weekly flute lesson at the Tommaso Ludovico de Victoria School, located near Piazza di Sant'Apollinare, just outside the Vatican walls. She was running a bit late. She called her sister from a payphone at 7 in the evening and mentioned something strange. A man had approached her earlier that day, offering a job selling Avon cosmetics at a fashion show. She sounded uneasy. She said they'd talk more when she got home. She never came home. By 11 that night, her family was panicking. They called police, Vatican officials, everyone they could reach, but no one seemed overly concerned. A teenage girl missing. She probably ran off. Got caught up in something. She'd be back by morning, but she wasn't. Then the phone calls started. Over the next few weeks, the Orlandi family received a series of cryptic calls from people claiming to know where Emanuela was. Some were anonymous. Some gave names like Mario or Pierluigi. The callers claimed Emanuela had voluntarily joined a religious group, was with friends, or was being held as part of a hostage exchange. That's when the narrative shifted from a missing person case to something much darker. According to the callers, Emanuela wasn't just missing. She was a bargaining chip, specifically being held in exchange for the release of Mehmet Ali Aka, the Turkish man who had attempted to assassinate Pope John Paul II in 1981. Aka had been arrested after firing 4 shots at the Pope in St. Peter's Square, striking him in the abdomen, right hand, and left arm. Miraculously, the Pope survived. Aka was imprisoned, but now someone was demanding his release, using a 15-year-old Vatican girl as leverage. The Vatican dismissed these calls as a hoax, as did the Italian police, but the Orlandi family believed them. They were desperate. They pleaded with the church to investigate, to make a public appeal, to speak to the world. The Vatican refused for decades. That silence would come to define the entire case, because as the years dragged on, new theories emerged, each one darker than the last. The first theory, the political one, suggested Emanuela had indeed been kidnapped by a group seeking to pressure the Vatican into releasing Aka. Some pointed to the Grey Wolves, a Turkish ultranationalist organization known for its ties to Aka. The logic was murky. Why target a Vatican citizen? Why a teenage girl? But the timing was suggestive, and the threats were specific Aja himself. From prison, later claimed she was alive and being held in a convent. He also said she'd been abducted by the Bulgarian Secret Service on orders from the Kremlin. Though many of his claims were demonstrably false, the second theory turned inward, toward the Vatican itself. This version, whispered through corridors of clerical power and splashed across tabloids, alleged that Emanuela had been the victim of a sex ring operating within the Vatican involving high-ranking church officials, diplomats, possibly even cardinals. According to this narrative, Emanuela had either witnessed something she shouldn't have or had been deliberately targeted. She was taken, silenced, and hidden. In 2012, a new spark reignited the case. A leaked document, allegedly written by a Vatican cardinal, surfaced in Italian media. It appeared to be a memo discussing expenses associated with Emanuela's care in foreign convents, hinting she had been moved across Europe under Vatican supervision. The Church denounced it as a forgery. Then, in 2018, things escalated again. A journalist reported that the Vatican had received an anonymous tip Emanuela's remains were buried inside the Teutonic Cemetery, a private Vatican burial ground adjacent to St. Peter's Basilica. The tip was specific to tombs beneath a statue of an angel holding a scroll. The Vatican agreed to open the tombs. Cameras rolled. The world watched, but when the marble was lifted, both tombs were empty. No coffins, no bones, no remains of the long-deceased German princesses who were supposed to be buried there. Just stone and silence. It was a cosmic joke, or a message. Some speculated that the bodies had been moved recently to prevent discovery. Others believed the tombs had been empty for decades. A ruse. A red herring. Then came the outcry. During the search, workers found a hidden room nearby, an underground chamber filled with bones, human remains, dozens of individuals. The Vatican ordered DNA testing. The results were vague. The bones were ancient, centuries old, not Emanuela's. Not helpful. The trail went cold again. And always through it all, the Vatican remained tight-lipped. They expressed sympathy, promised cooperation, but they refused to release internal documents. They denied any institutional involvement. They claimed they had nothing to hide, which raises the question, if that's true, why so much hiding? Why did it take the Vatican 36 years to open its own files on the Orlandi case? Why did the family's repeated requests for transparency get stonewalled? Why did Vatican police do so little in the initial hours? When time was most critical, why were some areas of Vatican City never searched at all? It's not paranoia. It's a pattern, and that pattern points to something deeper, an institutional instinct for secrecy, not necessarily because of guilt, but because of habit. The Vatican is a kingdom of silence, a fortress built on discretion. For centuries, it has hidden scandals, redacted truths, and buried histories. To open the door on Emanuela Orlandi's case isn't just about finding a girl. It's about what else might come spilling out, because this isn't just about a missing person. It's about money, about organized crime, about power. Some investigators believe the Orlandi case is tied to the Banco Ambrosiano scandal, a massive financial collapse in the 1980s that exposed deep connections between the Vatican Bank, the mafia, and shadowy offshore entities. The theory goes like this. Emanuela's father, Orlandi, worked for the Vatican Bank. He saw something, or said something, and his daughter was taken as a warning. It sounds outlandish until you remember what happened to Roberto Calvi, the president of Banco Ambrosiano. He was found hanging under Blackfriars Bridge in London in 1982. His death was ruled a suicide, then later, murder. His pockets were full of cash, stones tied to his legs. He was nicknamed God's banker. The message was clear, and maybe that message extended to Vatican City itself. Still, the Orlandi family never gave up. Emanuela's brother, Pietro, became the public face of the search for decades. He held vigils, filed lawsuits, appeared on talk shows, and begged the Vatican for answers. He marched through Rome with her photograph. He confronted cardinals. He met with Pope Benedict XVI and later with Pope Francis. Francis reportedly told him, "Emanuela is in heaven," which is not an answer. It's a tombstone. And yet, despite everything, the false leads, the botched investigations, the Vatican's evasions, the case remains open. In 2023, after renewed public pressure, the Vatican finally announced a new investigation. A prosecutor was appointed, files were promised, but many believe it's too late. Too many years, too many lies, too many opportunities lost, and Emanuela, she remains frozen in time. A 15-year-old girl with thick glasses, a vida smile, and a plastic flute. Her face appears on posters, graffiti, documentaries. Her name is whispered in the corners of cathedrals. She is a symbol? No, of secrecy, of injustice, of a mystery too dangerous to solve. Because maybe it's not just about what happened to her. Maybe it's about what finding out would reveal about the Vatican, about its connections, about its capacity for silence. And in that silence, the echo of a final question. If the Church cannot protect one of its own, inside its own walls, under the watchful eyes of its own God, then what is it protecting? The answer perhaps lies not in the living, but the dead. Because Emanuela's case is not the only papal mystery cloaked in shadow. Before her, another pope vanished. Not from the public eye, but from the papal throne itself. A man who ruled for just 33 days, and then died in the night. Next, we examine the most controversial papal death in modern history, Pope John Paul I, and the suspicious circumstances surrounding his brief and final reign. Mysterious deaths of popes. Pope John Paul I. He was called the Smiling Pope, Albino Luciani, a man of gentle demeanor, sharp intellect, and disarming humility. When he stepped out onto the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica in August 1978, newly elected and stunned, he greeted the crowds, not with bombast, but with bashfulness. There were no papal theatrics, no grandiloquent blessings, just a soft-spoken Venetian blinking in the Roman sun. Overwhelmed by the weight of a 2,000-year-old throne, he took the name John Paul I, a hybrid title, honoring his two predecessors, and with it, he inherited the darkest chapter of the Church's modern legacy. But then 33 days later, he was dead, just like that. No warning, no illness, no final words. Just a body found, slumped in bed in the early hours of the 29th of September, 1978. The official cause: heart attack. The unofficial explanation: a Vatican cover-up. Because from the moment Pope John Paul I died, the narrative became a tangled knot of contradictions, omissions, and secrecy. A tapestry of errors so egregious that even the most devout Catholics began to whisper, was it really natural, or was it something else? Let's begin with the facts, or what little we know of them. At approximately 5 in the morning, Sister Vincenza, the Pope's personal aide, knocked on the door of his papal apartment to deliver his morning coffee. No answer. She waited, knocked again. Nothing. Finally, she entered the room and found the Pope seated upright in bed, his reading glasses still on, a stack of papers in his hands, lifeless. The Vatican was immediately alerted, and from that moment on, the story began to shift. First, the Vatican claimed that John Paul I had been discovered by a male secretary, not the nun. This turned out to be false. The change was likely made to avoid the awkward optics of a woman being alone in the Pope's private quarters. Then, confusion reigned over who was notified first. The Vatican press office wasn't informed for hours. The public announcement came late in the morning, by which time rumors had already begun to spiral. No autopsy was performed. That decision alone sparked outrage. The Vatican claimed it was unnecessary. Italian law didn't require an autopsy for Vatican deaths, and the Pope had allegedly suffered from low blood pressure, but John Paul I had no known history of heart disease, no signs of distress the night before. He had just met with cardinals, laughed with aides, and even joked about upcoming changes. What changes? That's where the conspiracy begins. Because in those 33 days, Pope John Paul I had already made enemies, serious ones. He was reportedly planning a sweeping purge of the Vatican hierarchy, a house cleaning of corruption, nepotism, and secrecy. Rumors swirled that he had compiled a list of names of cardinals, bishops, and financial operatives linked to scandals within the Vatican Bank. He had voiced alarm over the growing influence of Masonic lodges in church affairs, a taboo topic. Some say he was preparing to dismantle the shady financial network that had ensnared the Vatican for decades. That network led directly to the Istituto per le Opere di Religione, the Vatican Bank. At the time, the bank was entangled in a web of financial deals, criminal partnerships, and shadowy investments. One of its chief figures was Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, an American prelate known for his size, power, and iron grip on Vatican finances. Marcinkus had deep ties to Roberto Calvi, the aforementioned God's banker, who later turned up dead beneath a bridge in London, pockets stuffed with bricks. According to some insiders, Pope John Paul I had grown increasingly disturbed by what he was learning. He had asked questions, demanded reports, even suggested that Marcinkus be removed. Then he died. Coincidence? Maybe. But the Vatican's behavior afterward only deepened suspicion. There was no death certificate, no clear timeline, conflicting reports about whether the Pope had complained of chest pain the night before. One cardinal claimed he'd received a phone call from John Paul I late that evening, sounding upbeat and determined. Another said the Pope had been writing notes at his desk until nearly midnight. And then there's the paper. When his body was discovered, he was holding a sheaf of documents. Some say it was a sermon draft. Others claim it was a list of pending appointments. But one persistent rumor alleges it was a dossier containing names, allegations, and plans to root out corruption within the Curia. That paper was never seen again, gone like the Pope himself. Was it just Vatican clumsiness? Bureaucratic panic? Or something worse? Theories blossomed, and one name appeared again and again: Propaganda Due, or P2. P2 was a clandestine Masonic lodge operating in Italy, composed of high-ranking politicians, military leaders, businessmen, and allegedly Vatican officials. Its influence ran deep, so deep, in fact, that the Italian government eventually outlawed it. Journalists who investigated P2 were threatened. Some disappeared, others turned up dead. And within Vatican circles, it was whispered that Pope John Paul I had discovered Masonic infiltration within the Church, possibly even within the College of Cardinals, that he had planned to expose them, and that someone, somewhere, decided he wouldn't live to do it. The Vatican has never responded to these claims. They don't need to. Their silence is the firewall. But in 1994, British author David Yallop published a bombshell book, In God's Name, laying out in detail the theory that Pope John Paul I was murdered. Yallop named names, described methods. He suggested the Pope may have been poisoned, possibly with digitalis, a drug that could induce a heart attack without leaving obvious traces. The book sold millions. The Vatican condemned it as fiction, but the questions never went away. Because beyond the conspiracy, beyond the tangled mess of Masons and bankers and cardinals, lies the human tragedy of Albino Luciani, a man who never sought power, who walked humbly, who refused to be crowned with the traditional papal tiara, who insisted on using I instead of the papal we, who once told a friend before his election that the idea of becoming pope filled him with dread. "I am not the man," he said. Maybe he wasn't, or maybe he was the only man capable of breaking the spell of the Vatican silence, financial rot, and ritualized power. And that made him dangerous. It's tempting to mythologize, to cast him as a martyr, the last good pope, the one who got too close to the truth. But we'll never know, because the Vatican won't reopen the case, won't exhume the body, won't release the documents. They've canonized him, declared him blessed, turned his life into a miracle. That, in their eyes, is enough. But sanctity is not the same as clarity, and sainthood doesn't answer questions like, who saw him last? Why wasn't an autopsy done? What happened to the documents in his hand? And above all, who benefited from his death? The answer lies buried, not just in the Vatican grotto, where his body rests, but in the 52 miles of archives above, in the memos, letters, transcripts, and files that no one is allowed to see. And if the death of one pope can vanish into that silence, what else has? Because John Paul I isn't the only pope to die under suspicious circumstances. There are others, Urban VI, who allegedly tortured cardinals, Clement II, possibly poisoned, John XII, rumored to have died in bed with a married woman. The papal office may be infallible, but the men who wear the robe mortal, fallible, vulnerable, sometimes too vulnerable. And if the Vatican is capable of concealing the suspicious death of a modern pope, imagine what else it might hide. Not just about death, but about damnation. Because while some mysteries are buried, others are summoned. In the next chapter, we delve into one of the most secretive tribunals in church history, an institution so veiled in ritual and silence that most Catholics have never heard of it. Yet, it holds the power to forgive sins no other priest can touch. They call it the Apostolic Penitentiary, and its secrets are darker than confession. If 7 layers deep into Vatican secrets hasn't scared you off yet, you're exactly the kind of person we make this for. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next. It only gets darker from here. And hey, while we're cracking codes, drop your location and the time where you're watching this. Is it 3 in the morning and you're still wide-eyed in Warsaw? Or lunchtime, lurking in Lima? Let's see who else is on this late-night pilgrimage. The Apostolic Penitentiary. In the Vatican's sprawling architecture of secrecy, where marble masks lies and silence is mistaken for sanctity, there exists an office so obscure, so theologically arcane, that most Catholics have never even heard of it. And those who have spoken of it do so only in whispers. It is not a court in the traditional sense. There are no televised trials, no gavel, no defense lawyers or dramatic cross-examinations. There is only sin. Sin so grave, so rare, so soul-staining, that it cannot be forgiven by any priest, not by a bishop, not even by most cardinals, only by the Pope, or more precisely, by the hidden priests who serve in his name. Welcome to the Apostolic Penitentiary, the most secret tribunal in the Catholic Church, and arguably the strangest legal institution on earth, founded in the 12th century, but formalized in its current form by Pope Alexander III in the late 1100s. The Apostolic Penitentiary is often described as the Tribunal of Mercy, but its name, steeped in the aesthetics of ancient justice, betrays something more severe: penitentiary. The very word drips with carceral resonance. It evokes steel bars, chains, guilt. It doesn't sound like a court of mercy. It sounds like a spiritual prison, and in some ways, it is. This office deals with sins so rare, so canonically catastrophic, that their absolution is reserved for the highest levels of church authority. We're not talking about everyday misdeeds, no jealousy, no gossip, no missed Sunday Mass. We're talking about reserved sins, sins that strike at the very heart of Catholic doctrine, acts so corrosive they fracture the ritual scaffolding of salvation itself. Among them, desecrating the Eucharist, that is throwing away or defiling the consecrated host, physically assaulting the Pope, violating the seal of confession, a priest revealing what a penitent has confessed, absolving an accomplice in a sexual sin. A priest who commits a sexual sin and then tries to absolve the person they sinned with. Attempting to ordain a woman as a priest, these are not just sins. They are spiritual nuclear events, and when they occur, they trigger a canonical lockdown. Local clergy are forbidden to handle them. The sinner must appeal directly through an elaborate, secretive process to the apostolic penitentiary. If approved, the sinner may be granted absolution. If not, they remain spiritually excommunicated, cut off from the sacramental life of the Church. Let's talk process. The penitentiary is located within the Apostolic Palace, not far from the papal apartments, but spiritually and procedurally, it exists in another dimension. It is headed by the major penitentiary, one of the highest-ranking cardinals in the Vatican. His identity is known, but his actions are not. His role is to safeguard the internal forum of the Church, the realm of conscience, confession, and moral judgment that lives beneath the surface of public doctrine. Cases are submitted in writing, always anonymously. Even the sinner's name is redacted. The details are typed, translated into Latin, and stripped of any identifying markers. The purpose is not to prosecute, but to judge in silence. Mercy rendered in darkness. Once the documents arrive, they are reviewed by a team of theologians and canon lawyers. They debate the nature of the sin, its gravity, its contrition. If absolution is granted, it is communicated back to the confessor, not the penitent, who then delivers the forgiveness under seal of confidentiality. Nothing is recorded publicly. No trace is kept in any register that can be accessed. The entire process is cloaked in such thick secrecy that even the Pope is technically not allowed to know the identities of those involved. And that raises the first terrifying question: why build a tribunal so secret, so labyrinthine, so immunized against transparency? The official answer: to protect the dignity of conscience, to safeguard the inner sanctum of moral repentance from public scrutiny. The unofficial answer: because if the truth came out, it would shake the Church to its marble foundations. Let's consider a hypothetical. A priest commits one of the reserved sins. Say he assaults someone sexually, then tries to absolve the victim in confession. That's not just a crime. It's a canonical abomination. But under the rules of the penitentiary, the name of the offender can be omitted. The bishop may not be notified. Civil authorities are not involved. If the priest seeks absolution through the tribunal and it is granted, the case disappears into the fog. No accountability, no justice, only forgiveness. The sin is washed away, but the damage remains. Now multiply that by centuries, because this office has existed for nearly a millennium. Think about what that means. How many priests have confessed to unspeakable acts, received absolution, and returned to ministry with a clean spiritual record? We'll never know, because the Vatican keeps no public statistics, and the major penitentiary rarely speaks. When he does, it's in careful theological riddles. In 2009, Cardinal James Francis Stafford briefly discussed the office's work, noting that the cases often involve extremely serious matters of conscience. But when pressed for examples, it declined, as he must. The seal is absolute, but the implications are chilling, because the Apostolic Penitentiary doesn't just deal with sin, it deals with power. It is the Vatican's internal bleach, its moral reset button, the place where the worst things imaginable are spiritually resolved without ever becoming real to the outside world. And perhaps most unsettling of all, it also grants indulgences. Yes, indulgences, those infamous remnants of medieval theology that once sparked a reformation. The idea that spiritual punishment in purgatory can be reduced by prayer, pilgrimage, or paperwork. The Apostolic Penitentiary oversees the granting of plenary indulgences, total forgiveness of temporal punishment due to sin. In 2000, The Great Jubilee year. The office was flooded with requests. Millions of Catholics walked through holy doors in cathedrals around the world, believing they were erasing lifetimes of purgatorial suffering with each step. And who signed off on that theology? The Apostolic Penitentiary. But while indulgences are publicly advertised, the tribunal's darker function remains hidden, tucked behind layers of canon law and marble corridors known only to a few. This secrecy raises another question. Has the Apostolic Penitentiary ever been used as a political tool? What if a confession touches not only on personal sin but on church crimes? What if a bishop confesses to covering up abuse or a cardinal confesses to conspiring against papal successor? What happens to those cases? Do they disappear? Do they rise? Or are they stored, buried in filing cabinets, labeled in Latin, sealed with red wax, and hidden in the one place? Even the Vatican's fiercest watchdogs cannot enter the archive, because here's the uncomfortable truth. The Apostolic Penitentiary and the Vatican's secret archives are not separate kingdoms. They are branches of the same tree. One purges sin, the other purges history. And when used together, they create a perfect storm of plausible deniability. The tribunal absolves the soul, the archive erases the record, and the world never knows. This is not an accident. It's theology weaponized as policy, and the real horror, it's all legal. Every process, every decree, every hidden document exists within the canon law of the Church. No secrets are technically being kept, only safeguarded. No crimes are being covered, only sins forgiven. The distinction is theological, but the consequences are real. Real victims, real pain, real blood. And while the faithful pray in candlelit chapels behind closed doors, a tribunal in the Vatican whispers over sins too shameful for daylight. No press, no jury, no voice for the harmed, just mercy, sanctified, sterilized, sealed forever. In the end, the Apostolic Penitentiary is not just a tribunal, it's a paradox. A court that offers forgiveness without exposure, a process that heals the penitent but not the wound, a place where the most damning acts are met with the softest response, silence. But the tribunal is not the only Vatican structure wrapped in ritual and secrecy, because while some sins are hidden in files, others are hidden in art, in architecture, in symbols carved into ceilings and painted into saints' eyes. Next, we turn to the ornate walls of the Vatican itself to explore the hidden symbols and messages in art and architecture. And the question they whisper, what truth has been painted over for centuries? Hiding in plain sight, hidden symbols and messages in art and architecture. Walk through the Vatican and you're overwhelmed deliberately. Every inch, every tile, every corner radiates with divine authority. It's not just a city, it's a performance, a 110-acre stage where marble and pigment do the preaching. Angels ascend on ceiling frescoes. Saints suffer in sculpted agony. Gold drips from every altar like blood from the Sacred Heart. It's a spectacle, but also a distraction, because beneath the splendor, beneath the brush strokes and the statuary, something else moves. Symbols, codes, messages. And if you know where to look and how to look, the Vatican begins to speak in a different voice. One not bound by catechism, but by iconography, a visual lexicon whispered through oil and stone. One that suggests there's another story layered beneath the one we're told. Let's start in the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo's masterpiece. The ceiling that changed Western art. It's celebrated for its technical genius, its anatomical detail, its theological narrative, but linger on certain elements too long. And reverence becomes suspicion. Take the creation of Adam, arguably the most iconic image in Christian art. God reaches out from a swirling cloud of angels and cherubs, fingers extended toward Adam, the moment before life. A divine spark. But look closer. That cloud God emerges from. It's not just a cloud. Anatomists have long noted that its shape and internal components mirror the human brain. The cerebrum, cerebellum, even the vertebral artery are rendered with startling precision. Michelangelo, remember, was an anatomist. He dissected corpses in secret. He knew exactly what he was painting. So, what was he saying? That God is a construct of the mind, that the divine lives not above, but within. It's theological dynamite, coated in fresco, protected by beauty. And it's not the only one. Moved to the Last Judgment, painted years later, on the altar wall of the same chapel. It's a massive, terrifying composition. Christ at the center, resurrecting the dead, casting souls to heaven or hell. But look at the figure of Saint Bartholomew. He's holding a flayed human skin. The symbol of his martyrdom, it dangles like a grotesque cloak. But the face on that skin, it's Michelangelo's own. A self-portrait trapped in skin, dangling between salvation and damnation. Was it humility? Was it rage? Was it a confession? The message is unclear. But the symbolism is surgical. Michelangelo wasn't alone. Take Raphael's School of Athens, located in the Vatican's Apostolic Palace, a pagan feast of philosophy painted at the heart of a Christian institution. Plato and Aristotle dominate the center, flanked by Pythagoras, Euclid, Ptolemy. No crosses, no halos, no mention of Christ. And yet, this painting sits just meters away from rooms, housing the Pope. Why? Because it's not just a celebration of knowledge, it's a quiet revolution. Raphael snuck in likenesses of contemporaries, Leonardo as Plato, Michelangelo as Heraclitus, even himself peering from the sidelines. He wove secular genius into sacred space. He blurred the line between revelation and reason, and the Church let him, or maybe needed him, because the Vatican's greatest secret may be this: it has always hidden truth inside beauty. It buries contradiction beneath spectacle, heterodoxy beneath harmony. You don't banish dangerous ideas. You frame them, you hang them on the wall, and you wait. Let's go deeper into the Borgia apartments, the private chambers of Pope Alexander VI, one of the most scandalous pontiffs in history. The walls here are painted with a swirling pagan mysticism. The Egyptian goddess Isis, the bull god Apis, zodiac saints, alchemical symbols in the private rooms of the Pope, painted by Pinturicchio at the Pope's own request. These aren't Christian motifs. They're esoteric, Gnostic, Hermetic, a visual fusion of pre-Christian spirituality and post-Christian theology. It's as if the Vatican wasn't hiding paganism, but embracing it. Why? Because at the core of every empire, spiritual or temporal, is the need to control narratives, and the Vatican has always been a master of this. It didn't destroy paganism. It absorbed it, rebranded it, rewrote it. Roman temples became churches. Mithraic rites became Eucharistic rituals. Sol Invictus became the birthday of Christ. What's one more symbol on a wall? Move outside to St. Peter's Square. At its center, an Egyptian obelisk, a 4,000-year-old monument originally built for the sun god Ra. It was brought to Rome under Caligula. The early Christians would have seen it as a symbol of empire and paganism. Now it stands at the center of Catholicism, flanked by Bernini's sweeping colonnades, a giant embrace, the pagan pillar, now a cross-topped monument to Christian dominance. Or so they say. But that obelisk, it's not just decorative. It's positioned, precisely, aligned with solar events. The piazza functions as a massive solar clock, casting shadows that mark the time of day and the seasons. Sunlight, shadows, symbols, geometry, in the service of God. Or is it the other way around? Bernini's architecture is full of these secrets. In the baldacchino above St. Peter's tomb, twisted columns spiral upward like DNA strands. 200 years before DNA was discovered, the design mirrors the ancient columns of Solomon's temple, said to hold esoteric wisdom. Carved into its bronze surfaces are bees, symbols of the Barberini family, laurel leaves, victory, and serpentine vines, symbols of regeneration, duality, temptation. Every inch whispers something. Even the floor. The Vatican's floors are mosaics of geometric patterns. labyrinthine in design. Many are based on cosmati technique, a medieval Italian style that incorporates sacred geometry, meant to reflect the divine order of the universe. Walk across them, and you're treading on a map of metaphysical balance. This isn't just art, it's theology in code. Then there's the Vatican Library. Beyond the known stacks lie maps and manuscripts that suggest the Church knew about certain geographical realities long before secular explorers did. Charts of the stars with pre-telescopic accuracy, anatomical drawings centuries before the Enlightenment, alchemical symbols, Kabbalistic diagrams. Did the Church suppress these, or did it simply house them? Knowing that power lies in controlling not truth, but access to truth. Because in the end, that's the real message of Vatican art. Access is everything. The secrets are in plain sight, but only if you've been taught to read them. It's why visitors marvel at the Sistine Chapel. Without understanding, they're staring at a blasphemy disguised as holiness. Why scholars analyze Raphael's frescoes without questioning why pagan philosophers were canonized in paint. Why pilgrims kneel before obelisks without knowing they were once altars to Ra. This isn't deception, it's design. Because art, unlike doctrine, is slippery. It allows the Church to have it both ways, to preach monotheism while displaying pagan iconography, to celebrate saints while painting self-portraits into their flesh, to affirm orthodoxy while embedding esoterica in every brushstroke. The Vatican has always known that power lies not just in what is said, but in what is shown and what is not explained. Because if you explain too much, the mystery dies, and without mystery, the spell is broken. But some symbols can't be hidden forever. Take the recurring motif of the pine cone, found in ancient Assyrian temples, Egyptian carvings, and prominently in the Vatican's Cortile della Pigna, Court of the Pine Cone. A massive bronze pine cone sculpture sits in the courtyard, flanked by peacocks. Officially, it's just a Roman fountain, but in esoteric traditions, the pine cone represents the pineal gland, the third eye, the gateway to divine knowledge. Why is it sitting in the center of the Vatican's courtyard? Just coincidence? Or just another message, sculpted in bronze, left to oxidize in the sun? There's one more symbol that haunts the halls: the labyrinth. Hidden in floor patterns, reflected in architectural symmetry, a motif of journey and return, confusion and clarity. It appears in mosaics, in garden paths, in ceiling layouts. It's not just decoration, it's a metaphor for the Church, for the human soul, for the Vatican itself. A place where the faithful wander, searching for answers, only to find more corridors, more symbols, more silence. And yet, the path is never random. It's designed because the Church doesn't just paint truth, it curates it. It shows you what you're allowed to see and hides what it doesn't want questioned. But even hidden truths have shadows, and some shadows are darker than symbols, deeper than architecture. Some are subterranean, beneath the chapels, beneath the museums, beneath the frescoed ceilings and bronze saints, lies a tunnel, a secret corridor, an escape route used by popes in times of peril, a path that leads not to salvation, but to survival. Next, we descend into the cobbled stones and locked passageways of the Passetto di Borgo, the Vatican's secret corridor of escape, and the mysteries buried in its walls. The Passetto di Borgo. It begins like something out of a Dan Brown novel, except it's real, not speculation, not allegory. A wall, a corridor, a lifeline. They call it the Passetto di Borgo, or simply the Little Passage, an 800-meter elevated tunnel of stone and shadow that runs like a secret artery from St. Peter's Basilica to Castel Sant'Angelo, the towering fortress that looms over the Tiber River like an ancient sentinel. From above, it looks like part of the city wall, unremarkable to tourists who pass beneath it. But within those narrow confines lies one of the Vatican's oldest escape plans. Built in the 13th century, possibly atop even older Roman routes, the Passetto was never just architecture, It was contingency, a corridor carved from fear, a backup plan for when divine protection failed, because for all its holiness, the Vatican has always been a fortress, and every fortress needs an exit. The Pasetto was used famously in 1527 during the sack of Rome, when the armies of Emperor Charles V, ironically, Catholic troops turned on the Pope himself. Rome descended into chaos. Blood filled the streets. Churches were looted, priests butchered, over 40,000 citizens slaughtered, and Pope Clement VII, he vanished, not into thin air, but into the Pasetto, as mercenaries tore through the Vatican, killing Swiss guards down to their last man. Clement slipped into the corridor. He emerged hours later behind the fortified walls of Castel Sant'Angelo, shaken but alive. The passage had worked, the Pope had fled, but the Pasetto isn't just a tunnel. It's a threshold between sacred and secular, between palace and prison, between the illusion of divine protection and the grim necessity of real-world strategy. And its existence raises uncomfortable questions. Why does the Vicar of Christ need an escape tunnel? What kinds of threats was the Vatican preparing for? Who else might have used it? And what, if anything, has it been used for? Since the official answer, the Pasetto is a relic, a historical artifact, a monument to an age of sword and siege. It is no longer used, merely preserved, but step inside it if you're ever granted permission. And the air tells a different story. It's not just dusty, it's quiet, tout quiet, like a throat holding back a scream. The walls are thick, the ceiling low. It twists, serpent-like, through the Borgo district, just above the heads of unsuspecting tourists. The windows' narrow slits are designed not for light, but for archers. This was a corridor designed to be defended, to be held at all costs. Even today, there are rumors of hidden doors within the passage, secret exits into side chapels, trap doors leading into catacombs, vaults sealed off. Since the Renaissance, some believe that during World War II, high-ranking clergy used the Pasetto to transport Jewish refugees out of the Vatican undetected. Others say the passage was used more recently to move sensitive persons or objects discreetly away from the cameras and crowds. Is it still operational? The Vatican won't say. The passage is rarely open to the public. When it is, access is limited, supervised, and fragmentary. Only a portion is visible, the rest sealed, maintained, yes, but silent. And that silence is telling, because corridors like the Pasetto aren't just about retreat. They're about control. Control of movement, of narrative, of exposure. If a pope needs to disappear into a fortress, a helicopter, or a waiting car, he doesn't walk through St. Peter's Square. He uses the Pasetto, or whatever modern equivalent, now serves that same ancient function. And the Vatican is very good at modernizing ancient functions. But here's where the legend fractures into something deeper. Some say the Pasetto was never just a physical tunnel, that beneath it, parallel to it, runs another passage, one not listed on any map. A ritual corridor, used not for escape, but for initiation. The theory goes like this. In the Middle Ages, certain clergy were inducted into secret rites, not officially recognized by the Church, but tolerated by it. These ceremonies required isolation, silence, and sacred geometry. The Pasetto, with its precise length, height, and curvature, allegedly matched ancient architectural codes used in pre-Christian mystery schools. Sound absurd? Not if you consider how often the Church has repurposed the symbols and spaces of the very heresies it claimed to destroy. Remember, the Vatican absorbed the temples of Rome, the holidays of the pagans, the symbols of the occult. The Pasetto might be a continuation of that logic, a spiritual corridor as much as a logistical one. Others believe the corridor houses more than just dust and memory. Smugglers once used it during the Renaissance. It's said that crates of forbidden books were moved through the Pasetto under cover of night texts by Galileo, by gun manuscripts, Heretical Gospels. One tale, persistently whispered among Vatican guides, tells of a black chest moved through the tunnel during the papacy of Pius IX. The chest was said to contain living cargo, a prisoner. Who or what was inside remains unclear. The chest was never opened publicly. It was taken into Castel Sant'Angelo. It never came out. Is the story true? No one knows. But it's not the only one. There are reports, unconfirmed, of course, that the Pasetto has been used to move relics in times of unrest, when mobs threatened the Vatican during the unification of Italy, when Mussolini's black shirts turned unpredictable, when Allied bombs fell too close to St. Peter's Dome. Documents and holy objects were allegedly funneled through the tunnel and hidden within the fortress. The logic is simple. If the Vatican is ever compromised, the Church must protect its memory, and that memory is physical scrolls. Bonus: artifacts, confessions. If even one relic suggests a different truth than the one preached from the altar, it must be saved or suppressed. And that brings us to the heart of the mystery. The Vatican has always treated knowledge the way other empires treat treasure. It hoards it, guards it, moves it at night, and the Pasetto is its armored courier. That's why it matters, because it's not just about what has moved through that passage. It's about what might still be down there. Are there sections, walled-off hidden rooms? Cryptic inscriptions. Every few years, a rumor resurfaces that a lower level of the Pasetto exists, a sub-passage, one that intersects with the ancient Roman sewer systems and early Christian catacombs, a corridor that predates the 13th century structure, used by early popes to flee Nero's persecutions. Archaeologists have tried to trace it, but the Vatican doesn't allow excavations near the corridor, not without permission, and permission is rarely granted because the Church guards its arteries. The Pasetto, then, is not just a historical curiosity, it is a living system, a physical embodiment of the Vatican's dual nature, divine on the surface, strategic beneath. It's a reminder that popes are not just shepherds, they are sovereigns, that behind the theology is the machinery of survival. And it's also a metaphor, a passage hidden in plain sight, used only in times of crisis, denied until it's needed, and then disappeared into, like so many other things in the Vatican. Because if the Pasetto is real, concrete, traceable, undeniable, what other corridors are metaphorical? What other tunnels exist in doctrine, in archives, in ritual ways of moving knowledge without detection, truth without revelation, history without consequence? The Pasetto is the visible one, but there are others, and some of them go much deeper, into places not even the Church will admit exist, like the subterranean vaults beneath the Vatican Library, the deepest, most inaccessible archives in the world. Some say that within those chambers, hidden beneath layers of rock and time, are texts that were never meant to be read, not just forgotten gospels, but writings that defy scripture, predict the future, or record visitations from beings not of this world. Because when you've secured an escape route from earthly danger, what about danger from the stars? Next, we examine the most outlandish and controversial artifact ever linked to the Vatican, a machine said to transcend time, to look backward, to observe the crucifixion, the resurrection, history itself. Like film, they call it the chronovisor, and according to those who claim to have seen it, the Vatican didn't just invent it, they hid it. The chronovisor, buried within the fog bank of Vatican legend, is a story so far-fetched, so defiantly weird, that even seasoned conspiracy theorists hesitate before saying it out loud. A time machine. Not metaphorical, not allegorical. A real device built, tested, operated, then buried under layers of secrecy so thick it may never be proven. A device that could allegedly allow its user to see through the fabric of time, not to travel through it, but to observe it, to witness any moment in history, replayed like archival footage on a cosmic reel. They called it the chronovisor. And according to the stories, the Vatican built it. Let's start with the man at the center of the myth, Father Pellegrino Ernetti, a Benedictine monk, musicologist, and exorcist with a sharp mind and a sharp tongue. He taught at the Benedetto Marcello Conservatory in Venice and was respected in academic circles for his work on Gregorian chants and ancient musical notation. But Father Ernetti also had another claim to fame, whispered only to a select few. In the 1950s, he said he was recruited by a group of scientists and priests working on a secret Vatican project. Among them, Nobel laureate physicist Enrico Fermi and aerospace engineer Wernher von Braun, the man who would go on to build NASA's Saturn V rocket. Their mission to construct a device capable of viewing past events by capturing the electromagnetic residues they believed lingered in the fabric of space-time. The idea was that every action, every word, every gesture left a permanent trace, like heat from a burned-out bulb. If you could tune into those frequencies, you could see history. It was audacious. It was insane. It was plausible. According to Ernetti, the group succeeded. The machine, dubbed the chronovisor, was the size of a large cabinet. It was made of cathode ray tubes, dials, antennae, and strange alloys, not publicly named. It looked like a Cold War Frankenstein of science and mysticism, but it worked. And what did they see? This is where the story explodes into cosmic high weirdness. Ernetti claimed they observed Christ's crucifixion, not artistic renditions, not visions, but the actual event. They watched Jesus stumble through Jerusalem, watched him nailed to the cross, watched him. They also allegedly viewed the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Cicero delivering speeches in the Roman Senate, Napoleon at Waterloo, a performance of a long-lost Latin play, Thyestes, by Quintus Ennius, which Ernetti later claimed to reconstruct from memory, sparking intense academic debate. It sounds impossible, absurd, blasphemous, but here's where things get strange. In 1972, an Italian newspaper, La Domenica del Corriere, ran an article about the chronovisor. It included a photograph, a grainy black and white image, allegedly captured from the device. It showed a man in agony, eyes turned upward, mouth twisted in suffering. The Vatican never confirmed the image, but it never denied it either. That photograph was later debunked, allegedly traced to a 20th century sculptor's rendering of Christ, a reproduction, a hoax. But if it was a hoax, why did Ernetti insist it wasn't? Why? On his deathbed, did he stand by the story? And why did the Vatican issue a cryptic statement shortly after the article's publication, warning that anyone using such a device would be violating the sanctity of divine time? A bizarre and telling phrase. Critics dismissed the entire saga as science fiction. Ernetti was accused of delusion, attention-seeking, or senility. The photograph was mocked. The play transcript he published under his own name was dismissed as forgery. But others weren't so sure because the Vatican, remember, never disclosed the device's existence, but it also never buried it. And that's the Vatican's move when something is real, not outright denial, just silence, ambiguity, enough room for doubt to become belief. So let's assume for a moment that the chronovisor existed. What then? The implications are monstrous. With such a device, the Church could settle historical disputes with precision, authenticate relics, confirm miracles, refute heresies, watch the Council of Nicaea, observe the resurrection, even view the original authorship of controversial scriptures. It would be the ultimate ecclesiastical weapon, a theological microscope. But it would also be a liability. Because what if the crucifixion didn't happen? The way Scripture says, what if the resurrection looked more metaphorical than miraculous? What if Peter never reached Rome? What if Jesus wasn't alone on that hill? A device that sees through time also sees through doctrine, and that is dangerous. Which brings us to the Vatican's alleged response. According to those close to Ernetti, and later Vatican insiders who dared to comment, the The chronovisor was dismantled, disassembled, hidden. The reason too powerful, too unpredictable, too subversive. If it were revealed, the very structure of the church could unravel, because faith, after all, relies on mystery. The chronovisor destroys mystery. It turns the divine into data, and in the world of theology, certainty is heresy. But what if it wasn't destroyed? What if the church, rather than dismantling it, simply relocated it? The Vatican is notorious for moving sensitive objects, unlabeled crates, sealed vaults, archives, under review. Some believe the device is still functional, maintained in a sub-basement laboratory below the Vatican Library, accessed by a coded elevator guarded by oath-bound clergy scientists, a handful of men who hold the keys to the past. Or maybe it's not in Rome at all. Some claim the chronovisor was smuggled out during the papacy of John Paul II, fearing theft by intelligence agencies. Others say it was handed off to the Jesuits, known for their global reach and deep involvement in scientific research. There are even rumors, wild, calyptic, that the device has seen the future, that it was used to observe not only history, but prophecy, events yet to unfold, the end of times, the rise of new empires, a second coming, or a final judgment. And that's why it was hidden, not because of what it showed about the past, but because of what it showed about what's coming. A few voices, Forma Insidious, have hinted at this. In a 1990s interview, Father Malachi Martin, former Vatican insider and author of Windswept House, suggested that the church possessed knowledge so horrifying it could collapse society. When asked if he meant extraterrestrial contact, he said, "No. Worse." He never explained. He died in 1999, under what some call suspicious circumstances. But the question lingers. If the Vatican had a way to observe the crucifixion, would they tell us if they had evidence, actual visual proof, that Jesus lived and died and rose, or didn't? Would they release it, or would they lock it away? Not because it disproves the faith, but because it makes the faith irrelevant? Because if you can rewind God like a video, if you can pause the passion, slow down the resurrection, you no longer need belief. You have footage. You've replaced faith with forensics. And the church cannot survive that. So maybe the chronovisor was destroyed, or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it's still down there, humming softly in a dark Vatican vault, projecting spectral images onto a wall scenes from Eden, from Calvary, from the Council of Trent. Maybe the device is now more myth than mechanism. Maybe it never existed. But even if it didn't, its story still matters, because it speaks to our deepest fear and deepest desire to know, to stop guessing, to stop believing, to watch. But the Vatican isn't ready for that. It prefers its secrets sealed, its history curated, its truth in layers. The chronovisor rips those layers off. It makes everything visible. And in the Vatican, visibility is the one sin too dangerous to forgive. But this isn't the only tale of knowledge, hoarded and light hidden, because long before anyone claimed to build a time machine, the church was already deciding which books belonged to God and which books needed to disappear. Next, we unravel the dark literary purge that still echoes in the margins of modern Bibles. The missing books from the Bible, the question no priest wants to answer. What did God say that we weren't allowed to read the missing books from the Bible? Every hotel drawer, every church pew, every devout home within each sits a Bible, bound in leather or faux leather or battered paperback. Page after page of translated verse, Genesis to Revelation, a sacred spine. But here's the question. No one wants to ask, who decided what made the cut? Because the Bible, contrary to what some believe, did not descend fully formed from the heavens. It was compiled, curated, edited, redacted, the result of centuries of political maneuvering, theological brawls, and ideological warfare. And along the way, books vanished. Some were left out deliberately, others were lost, only to be found again centuries later in desert caves or beneath church ruins. A few remain ghosts, whispered in Apocrypha, referenced by prophets but never seen, and the Vatican knows more than it says. Let's begin. In the year 1684, Pope Clement XI, a man of contradiction, patron of art, scourge of heresy. That year, under his watch, 14 books were formally removed from the Bible's standard edition. Not minor footnotes, whole books. Gone. Among them, 1st and 2nd Ezra, Tobit, Judith, the Wisdom of Solomon, Ecclesiasticus, Sirach, Baruch, the Prayer of Manasseh, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, additions to Daniel and Esther. These weren't fringe texts. They had been considered sacred for centuries, included in the Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament used by early Christians, quoted by church fathers, preached from pulpits, and then erased. The reasons given were doctrinal clarity, to standardize the canon, to avoid confusion, but the Vatican has always favored control over clarity, and these books were problematic because they didn't fit the narrative. Take the Wisdom of Solomon. It describes the soul's journey through reincarnation, a concept now heretical in Christian doctrine. Take 2nd Maccabees, which speaks openly of prayers for the dead, and the concept of purgatory, too Catholic for Protestants, too theological a minefield for reformers. Or Baruch, which contains a prophecy about the Babylonian exile that directly contradicts the timeline used by church historians. Then there's Ezra's. In 2nd Ezra, also known as 4th Ezra, the text prophesies the return of an unseen Messiah, not as a man of peace, but as a cosmic avenger, fire, destruction, heavenly armies. It's apocalyptic sci-fi wrapped in scripture, and it was once included in early English Bibles before being quietly phased out. Who made that call? Rome. Because the church does not simply interpret the Word of God, it decides what qualifies. And for centuries, that decision was made behind Vatican doors. But let's go deeper. Because the books removed in 1684 weren't the first to disappear. Throughout the early centuries of Christianity, there was no fixed Bible. Local churches used what they had: letters from apostles, copies of the Gospels, bits of Jewish scripture. Dozens of texts floated through the spiritual bloodstream of the early church. Then came the councils, Nicaea, Hippo, Carthage, rooms filled with bishops, emperors, and agendas, debating what was in and what was out. Among the casualties, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the Acts of Paul and Thecla, the Gospel of Judas, the Shepherd of Hermas, the Epistle of Barnabas, the Book of Enoch. Each one cast aside, not because they lacked spiritual value, but because they challenged the growing orthodoxy. Take the Gospel of Thomas, discovered in 1945 near Nag Hammadi in Egypt. It contains 114 sayings attributed to Jesus. Many align with canonical Gospels, others not so much. In Thomas, Jesus says salvation comes not through belief or sacrifice, but through self-knowledge. The kingdom of God is inside you, he says, and it is outside you. No miracles, no passion, just mysticism. Too Gnostic, too dangerous. Or the Gospel of Mary, a text in which Mary Magdalene is portrayed not as a passive follower, but as a disciple of wisdom, entrusted with secret teachings that the male apostles reject. In it, Peter grows jealous. He questions why Jesus would trust a woman more than them. That's not a theological wrinkle. That's a power struggle. 1. The church resolved the way it always does with silence. The Gospel of Judas is even more radioactive. Found in the 1970s and authenticated decades later, it flips the entire passion narrative. Judas isn't a traitor. He's the most faithful disciple. Jesus tells him to hand him over because it's part of the divine plan. Judas doesn't betray. He obeys. Imagine rewriting 2 millennia of Holy Week. The Vatican did what it had to. They didn't burn the text. They buried it. But perhaps the most mystifying omission is the Book of Enoch, a sprawling apocalyptic epic, once beloved by early Christians. Quoted in the New Testament itself, it speaks of angels who fell from heaven, mated with human women, and gave birth to giants. It describes visions of heaven, cosmic realms, the names of fallen angels, the architecture of divine punishment. It's the Book of Revelation on steroids. Why was it removed? Because it was too weird, too wild, too revealing. It suggests a pandemoniacal world. It gives names to demons. It maps out the heavens like a celestial Google Earth. And if you believe the Vatican has a problem with people asking too many questions about the afterlife, Enoch is a liability. It's the kind of text you seal in a vault next to the ones about exorcisms and alien encounters, which brings us to a darker question: what hasn't been found? If these books, hidden in caves, forgotten in monasteries, could surface centuries later, what's still missing? What's still buried? What's still sealed in the Vatican archive? Because the archive isn't just a warehouse of old paperwork, it's a memory bank, a black box for theological disasters, a place where problematic texts go to die. Some believe there are entire gospels down there that have never been seen. Early versions of Mark and Matthew, original Hebrew versions of texts, now lost to Greek translation, writings by apostles not recognized by the church, a gospel of Peter, a gospel of Philip, a gospel of the 12, maybe even a gospel written by Jesus himself. Impossible. Not if you ask the right scholars. Some believe oral traditions may have been written down in the 1st century, then suppressed. If Jesus left behind any writing letters, parables, notes, where would they go? Not the Library of Alexandria, not the British Museum, the Vatican. And what if those texts contradict the official story? What if they depict Jesus not as divine, but human, not as a king, but as a revolutionary, not as a sacrifice, but as a symbol? Those aren't just theological debates. They're existential threats to an institution built on very specific interpretations. And so they're missing, or rather, they're kept missing because the Vatican understands something few others do. Words are power. Narrative is control. And by choosing which books make the Bible, they don't just define God, they define reality. So the next time someone hands you a Bible, leather-bound and gilded, remember, it's not the whole story. It's the authorized story, and the rest is still waiting in caves, in archives, in the sealed vaults beneath the Apostolic Palace. Next, we turn to one of the Vatican's most enduring whispers, not about Scripture, not about saints, but about a secret society, a hidden alliance of wealth, power, and ritual said to operate behind the facade of faith. They call it the Illuminati. But the real question is, what's the Vatican's role in secret societies? And why won't they admit they've played both sides, SDP on both sides for centuries? The Vatican's role in secret societies. If power has a scent, the Vatican smells like old velvet and candle smoke. But beneath that perfume of incense and tradition, there's a colder aroma, one that lingers behind locked doors in marble halls, where silence is law and history is weaponized. Because not all power is public, and not all alliances are holy. Some wear robes, some wear rings, some whisper in Latin, others in cipher. And for centuries, one question has simmered just below the surface of Catholic history, bubbling through papal conclaves and occult rumor mills alike. Is the Vatican in bed with secret societies? And more importantly, has it always been? To answer that, we need to shed a few assumptions. First, that secret societies are fringe, that they operate in shadows because they're small, weak, irrelevant. No. Some secret societies are more powerful than governments, older than constitutions, immune to the rise and fall of kings, and the Vatican isn't afraid of them. It may have helped create them. Let's begin with the Illuminati. The name alone conjures images of pyramid, all-seeing eyes, cloaked initiates, running the world from smoky backrooms. Founded in 1776 in Bavaria by Adam Weishaupt, the Illuminati began as an Enlightenment-era think tank, a rebellion of intellectuals against the church and the state. They were anti-monarchist, anti-clerical, anti-authority. Naturally, the Vatican hated them. Or did it? Here's where things get weird. Weishaupt was Jesuit-educated, trained by the church in their methods of discipline, rhetoric, secrecy. And while he later rejected their theology, his organizational style cells, degrees, symbolic hierarchies mirrored the very structure of the Society of Jesus itself. The Jesuits were founded in 1540 by Ignatius of Loyola. Officially, they were missionaries and educators. Unofficially, a spiritual militia, vowed to obedience, loyalty, and internal silence. They operated like a military order with theological justification, intelligence gathering, political influence, infiltration. Sound familiar? To some, the Illuminati was not a rebellion from the church, but an offshoot, an evolution. Same methods, different goals. And the Vatican knew this because, while it excommunicated Weishaupt and condemned secret societies in sweeping bulls, like in Eminenti Apostolatus in 1738, it also copied their tactics for centuries. The church had already been dabbling in clandestine alliances. It needed them for protection, for propaganda, for politics. Let's rewind to the Knights Templar, originally created to protect pilgrims on their way to the Holy Land. The Templars became a powerful transcontinental order, military monks with banking privileges. They controlled vast land holdings, answered only to the Pope, and invented financial instruments centuries ahead of their time. Then they got too powerful. By the early 1300s, King Philip IV of France owed the Templars a crippling debt, so he accused them of heresy, sodomy, devil worship. On Friday, the 13th, 1307, he had them arrested, tortured, burned. The Vatican caved. Pope Clement V dissolved the order under pressure, but many believe the Templars simply went underground. They formed the skeletal frame of later secret groups, Freemasons, Rosicrucians, and yes, the Illuminati. In this version of the story, the Vatican didn't just destroy the Templars, it inherited their secrets, and that pattern repeats with the Freemasons, for example, officially condemned by the Church, declared incompatible with Catholicism. Masonic membership means automatic excommunication, but behind closed doors, that line blurs. During the 19th and 20th centuries, numerous clergy were found to be members of Masonic lodges, especially in Italy, France, and Spain. Some joined for influence, others for ideology. Still others may have been assigned to observe, infiltrate, or manipulate, because the Vatican is not naive. It knows power doesn't always wear vestments. Sometimes it wears aprons, and sometimes it wears both. In 1976, a scandal broke wide open. A journalist exposed the existence of Propaganda Due, P2, an illegal Masonic lodge operating within Italy's elite circles. Politicians, judges, military officers, bankers, and yes, Vatican officials. At the center of the storm was Licio Gelli, a fascist sympathizer and grandmaster of P2. His lodge was accused of plotting coups, laundering money, and orchestrating high-level assassinations. And intertwined with P2, the Vatican Bank, the Istituto per le Opere di Religione, became a laundering channel for illegal funds connected to Banco Ambrosiano, whose chairman, Roberto Calvi, was found hanging under Blackfriars Bridge in 1982. His death was ruled a suicide, then murder. In his pockets, bricks and cash. Around his neck, whispers of the Vatican. Pope John Paul I had begun to investigate these connections. Then he died after just 33 days in office. Heart attack. They said, no autopsy. They added, It doesn't take an occult decoder ring to draw the lines. Freemasonry. Banking. P2. The Vatican, dead bankers, dead popes, and a trail of bodies leading to locked doors and sealed records. But the Vatican's ties to secret societies don't stop with the Masons. There's also the Jesuit order itself, the so-called Black Pope, a nickname for the superior general of the Jesuits, wields enormous, behind-the-scenes power. Some believe he outranks even the visible Pope. The Society of Jesus functions as an internal intelligence agency with global operatives, embedded loyalties, and centuries-old secrets. Sound like fantasy? Ask any Vatican insider off the record who really pulls the strings in papal elections. Many will smile and say nothing. Others point to Opus Dei, the ultra-conservative Catholic institution, granted personal prelature by Pope John Paul II, with billions in assets, political connections across Europe and Latin America, and a reputation for internal secrecy. Opus Dei has been accused of cult-like behavior and excessive influence over church decisions. It, too, wears the mask of devotion, but moves like a network. Then, there's the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, a 900-year-old Catholic lay religious order with diplomatic status, passports, and its own internal hierarchy. It answers to the Pope, but functions like a shadow state. In recent years, power struggles between the order and the Vatican have surfaced, including a forced resignation of its Grand Master over ethical and financial disputes. And yet these groups remain never disbanded, never truly disowned. Which brings us to the final, most damning theory that the Vatican doesn't just oppose secret societies. It is one, think about it, hierarchical degrees, initiation rites, symbols, Latin mottos, sworn secrecy, special clothing, restricted archives, a single central leader with supreme authority. The Vatican doesn't resemble a spiritual community. It resembles a ritual order. Its theology functions like doctrine. Its priests function like ranks. Its cathedrals are temples. Its artifacts are relics. Its rituals, baptism, confirmation, Eucharist mirror the stages of esoteric enlightenment. And, at the top, the Pope, a living symbol of divine authority, infallible, cloaked in white, guarded by an elite corps, living in a city-state, with its own rules, borders, currency, and legal system. It's not a religion, it's a sovereign mystery cult. And once you see it that way, everything clicks. The Vatican doesn't need to fear secret societies, it competes with them. Or perhaps, more accurately, it absorbs them. Because the Church has always played a long game. When it couldn't destroy paganism, it repurposed it. When it couldn't kill heresies, it buried them. When it couldn't control politics, it infiltrated them. The secret society playbook was written in Rome, and it's still being used. But not all mysteries are political. Some are astronomical. Some look up, not down. The fate of the Knights Templar, their treasure, and their true history. It begins in blood, the 13th of October, 1307, a Friday, a dawn raid across France, knights roused from sleep, chains, fire, screams behind monastery walls, and then silence. The order of the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, more famously known as the Knights Templar, was officially over, or so the world was told. But what followed was not peace. It was absence, a void of explanation. Because when King Philip IV of France and Pope Clement V orchestrated the destruction of the most powerful military order in Christendom, they expected resistance, gold, armies, fortress. Instead, they found almost nothing. The Templars' fleet gone, their treasury empty, their leadership captured, but strangely resigned. It was as if the Templars had known it was coming, as if they had already moved their most valuable possessions beyond the reach of kings and popes. Which is where the mystery begins. Because for over 700 years, rumors have swirled that the Templars didn't die. They went underground, and they took their treasure with them. Let's rewind. Founded in 1119, the Templars were elite, warrior monks sworn to poverty, chastity, and obedience. But they weren't just swords for hire. They were bankers, architects, diplomats. They invented the precursor to modern checking accounts. They ran a trans-European network of safe houses and financial hubs. They amassed land, relics, and favors. By the 13th century, they were untouchable, which made them dangerous. Philip IV was broke. He owed the Templars money. He feared their loyalty to the Pope over his own crown, and he wanted what they had: power, gold, and secrets. So he fabricated charges: heresy, idol worship, sodomy, spitting on the cross. The Templars were arrested, tortured. Many confessed, then recanted, then burned. And yet, no treasure was recovered. Not from the Paris Temple, not from the preceptories in Champagne or Poitou, not from the island fortresses, nothing. So, where did it go? And what was it? Most assume gold, jewels, paper, IOUs. But others believe the Templars possessed something more valuable than wealth: knowledge. Start with the Temple of Solomon. The Templars' headquarters in Jerusalem was allegedly built on the ruins of the Second Temple. During their early years in the Holy Land, they weren't fighting. They were digging, excavating beneath the Temple Mount. Some believe they found ancient relics, writings, forbidden texts. Some say they found the Ark of the Covenant. Others whisper of the Holy Grail, not a cup, but a bloodline. Proof that Jesus had descendants, a revelation that would shatter Christian theology if revealed. And what did they do with it? They hid it, not just in physical vaults, but within symbols, ritual, architecture. After the dissolution of their order, the Templars scattered. Some fled to Portugal and rebranded as the Order of Christ. Others were absorbed into local orders. Some, according to legend, sailed west across the Atlantic centuries before Columbus. But others, they stayed, hidden in plain sight. Their symbols, twin knights on a horse, red crosses, equal-armed swords began to appear in new places. In Freemasonry, in Rosicrucian orders, in secret architectural layouts of cathedrals, in encoded manuscripts, even within the Vatican itself, because the Templars had once been the Pope's private army. And some believe a part of that alliance never truly died. It just went dark. Consider this: when Pope Clement V dissolved the order under pressure from King Philip, he did so reluctantly. There was no formal trial, no conviction, just a papal decree citing political necessity. Even the church archives from the trials, known as the Chinon Parchment, were hidden for centuries. When they were rediscovered in the Vatican archives in 2001, they revealed a shocking truth. The Pope had absolved the Templars of heresy in secret. They were never excommunicated, never declared heretics. So what was the real reason for the purge? To eliminate a political rival or to claim their secrets? There's a theory that Pope Clement didn't destroy the Templars. He absorbed them, took what they had: texts, relics, astronomical charts, perhaps even Gnostic Gospels, and hid them deep in the Vatican, beneath St. Peter's Basilica, in the secret archives, in the layers of silence beneath Rome. And the treasure, if it wasn't physical wealth, it was intellectual. The kind of treasure that could rewrite theology, that could unseat kings, that could, if leaked, change the world. But what about the actual gold legends? Say it was moved by sea. On the night of the arrests in France, a fleet of Templar ships disappeared from the port of La Rochelle, vanished. No logs, no wreckage. Some say they sailed to Scotland, where the Templars had allies among the clans, and within the unfinished walls of Rosslyn Chapel. Others say they reached Portugal, where the newly formed Order of Christ inherited their fleet and continued their explorations under Prince Henry the Navigator. Still others claim they crossed the Atlantic. Maps discovered centuries later, Portolan charts showing coastlines unknown to Europe at the time. bear cryptic symbols linked to the Templars. Some believe they reached Nova Scotia, where the Oak Island mystery revolves around buried treasure, booby traps, and carved stones bearing medieval crosses. Too wild to believe. Then explain this. Why did the Vatican, for centuries, remain obsessed with controlling Templar narratives? Why are references to them in official church documents rare and carefully curated? Why was the Chinan parchment hidden? Why are Templar sites across Europe filled with symbolism that matches esoteric Christian traditions, not orthodoxy? Because something survived, not just a rumor, not just a legend, a structure, a network, and maybe, just maybe, a truth, one the church cannot afford to confirm. Because if the Templars did find something beneath the Temple Mount, be it the Ark, the Grail, or forbidden scriptures, then the church has two options: acknowledge it and unravel centuries of doctrine, or bury it. Which option does the Vatican usually choose? Ask Galileo. Ask Giordano Bruno. Ask the keepers of the secret archives. Some believe that deep within those 52 miles of shelving, the Templar documents still sit cataloged, translated, filed, but not published, not revealed, and perhaps not even believed by their keepers, because that's the final twist. What if the Vatican itself doesn't fully understand what it's hiding? What if the secrets of the Templars have become too dangerous even to read? A kind of theological radiation, better left sealed. But the world keeps digging treasure hunters, symbologists, skeptics, pilgrims, and every few decades, a new clue surfaces: a manuscript, a coin, a stone slab hinting that the greatest treasure ever hidden wasn't gold or jewels. It was revelation, a knowledge so transformative it could reset civilization, and somewhere in the shadows of St. Peter's Dome, someone still guards it. Maybe not a knight, but someone in robes, watching, waiting, and ensuring the world never finds the door. But what happens when the symbols themselves start speaking? When the architecture of the Vatican begins whispering truths too dangerous for parchment? The enigma of the Vicarious Filii, DEI inscription. It sounds like a Da Vinci Code riddle, a Latin phrase, a number, a centuries-old controversy wrapped in papal robes and dark numerology. But this isn't fiction. This is theology, politics, symbolism, fear, braided into a single relentless mystery. Vicarious Filii, DEI, representative of the Son of God. The phrase has long haunted the halls of conspiracy and apologetics alike. On its surface, it seems innocent enough. It's a title, a reflection of papal authority, a claim of representation that the Pope, as successor to St. Peter, stands in place of Christ on earth. But then the numbers come in, because in Roman numerals, every letter holds value, and when you extract the numerals from Vicarious Filii, DEI, assign them their traditional Roman values, and total them, the result is this 666, the number of the beast. Revelation, chapter 13, verse 18, King James Version. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. That single verse launched 1,000 books, websites, late-night radio specials, and theological flame wars. Because if 666 is the mark of the beast, the signature of the Antichrist, and Vicarious Filii Dei is a papal title, then what does that make the Pope, and what does the Vatican know? Let's take it step by step. First, the phrase itself, vicarious, means substitute or representative. Filii means of the Son. DEI means of God. Together, representative of the Son of God. Historically, the term has been used in church writings, though not universally or officially, as the Pope's formal title. It appears in documents, canon law discussions, and apologist tracts. Notably, it was used in the donation of Constantine, a forged imperial decree that gave the Pope temporal power over Rome and the Western world, a document now universally acknowledged as fake. Already, we're off to a suspicious start. The number calculation works like this: V equals 5, I equals 1, C equals 100, A equals 0, R equals 0, I equals 1, U or V equals 5, S equals 0, vicarious equals 112, F equals 0, I equals 1, L equals 50, I equals 1, I equals 1, Filii equals 53, D equals 500, E equals 0, I equals 1, DEI equals 501, total 112 plus 53 plus 501 equals 666. Now, if this were just numerology, it might be dismissed. But this isn't a number drawn from a lottery. It's Revelation's number, the apocalyptic cipher, the numerical DNA of the adversary of God. So when critics of the Church, especially during the Protestant Reformation, found this calculation, they didn't whisper it, they shouted it. Martin Luther, John Calvin, the authors of the Westminster Confession, many believed the papacy was not merely corrupt, but the Antichrist system itself, and they pointed to vicarious filii Dei as evidence. The Catholic Church naturally denied this interpretation. The phrase, they argued, was never an official papal title. It's not inscribed on the papal tiara. It's not used in formal documents. Its presence in some historical writings does not constitute doctrinal significance. But here's where it gets murkier. There are reports persistent, though hard to verify, that older papal tiaras, worn during coronation rituals prior to the 20th century, bore the phrase, photographs. None reliable. Access to the Vatican's crown collection, highly restricted. The Vatican claims it no longer uses the tiara, especially after the reforms of Pope Paul VI in the 1960s. Modern popes have eschewed it in favor of a simpler mitre, but the symbolism remains. The title of Vicar of Christ is still in use, and the Latin phrase, while un official, reflects that same idea, which raises the real question: why does this matter? It's not about superstition. It's about authority. Because the entire edifice of the Catholic Church rests on a single seismic claim that the Pope speaks for God, that he holds the keys to heaven, that his office is divinely sanctioned. If that claim is false, or worse, if it's a blasphemous inversion, then the Church isn't just flawed, it's deceived. And that's where the 666 theory gets teeth. Because this isn't about letters and numbers, it's about power masquerading as holiness. And that fear that the institution meant to represent Christ is actually aligned with the adversary is not new. In the medieval period, rival factions within the Church accused popes of being false shepherds. Anti-popes were declared. Crusades were launched. The line between divine and demonic was always paper thin. Then there's the apocalyptic angle. Revelation doesn't just speak of the beast. It speaks of a great religious power sitting upon many waters, arrayed in purple and scarlet, drunk with the blood of saints. And at the heart of that vision, a woman sits upon a beast, a city with 7 hills roam. The parallels are unsettling, so unsettling, in fact, that many modern Catholic apologists have attempted to disarm the vicarious filii Dei theory through various methods, deny the title's official use, challenge the Roman numeral math, point out that many names can total 666, all valid points, and yet none quite answer why the Church has never allowed full access to all papal regalia, particularly the oldest tiaras and mitres. Why the phrase appears in centuries-old church literature, yet is now denied. Why the Vatican refuses to acknowledge the symbolic danger of the title, even if it never used it, and why a church obsessed with symbolism seems so uneasy about this one. Because if you've ever walked through St. Peter's Basilica, You know, the Vatican is a monument to precision. Every symbol, every sculpture, every Latin phrase chiseled into marble has a purpose. They do not operate on accident. So, if the number 666 can be derived from a title used by the Pope, whether historically or colloquially, it means something, even if only psychologically, because numbers carry weight. The same Vatican that built its calendar around celestial events is surely aware of biblical numerology. So, what if vicarious Filii Dei isn't an official title? What if it's worse? What if it's true? What if, through a cosmic irony, the Church chose a phrase that fulfilled an ancient prophecy, not because it wanted to, but because it couldn't escape it? What if the papacy itself is caught in a loop, a prophecy trap, a riddle in Latin? And the answer is 666. Of course, most Catholics will never hear of this. It's not in catechism classes. It's not in the Vatican's press releases. It's not in the gift shop. It lives in footnotes, margins, shadows. But it's there, waiting. And perhaps buried somewhere in the Vatican archives is the original documentation, a letter, a decree, a papal order, something that explains why this phrase was ever used in the first place and why it was later buried. But the Vatican isn't talking, and the beast doesn't need to roar. Sometimes, all it needs is a number. The catacombs of St. Calixtus and others. To step into the catacombs is to step backward, into a time when Christianity wore no crowns, claimed no thrones, and crouched beneath the earth like a hunted thing. The Roman Empire above bustled with markets, palaces, gladiators, and gods made of bronze. But down below, in the dirt-veined veins of the underworld, a different kingdom grew, one without swords, without marble, without light. It is here, buried beneath the roads of Rome, that the Church first laid down its bones, and nowhere is that more palpable than in the catacombs of St. Calixtus, 100 years before Constantine legalized Christianity, before popes became princes and basilicas pierced the skyline. There were the catacombs mazes of tomb-lined tunnels, dug deep into soft volcanic rock. These weren't just burial chambers. They were refuges, secret places of worship, cryptic archives of belief, grief, and resistance. The catacombs of St. Calixtus, named after the future pope and martyr Calixtus I, stretched for miles beneath the Appian Way. 16 popes were buried here, alongside dozens of martyrs and thousands of unnamed believers. The architecture is brutal in its simplicity: narrow corridors, arched niches, stacked coffins. The only decoration, faint frescoes, scratched prayers, and symbols carved into the stone: fish, anchors, doves, loaves. And yet, despite centuries of excavation and study, the catacombs remain a deep mystery, because not all corridors have been mapped, not all chambers have been opened, and not everything found has been shared. Let's start with the scope. Scholars estimate that the Calixtus catacombs alone hold over 500,000 graves. The walls are honeycombed with niches, some no larger than a suitcase, affaires burials, often marked only with a name and a date, others sealed with marble slabs etched in Latin or Greek. Some entire families lie together, stacked through generations, sealed in silence. But here's the problem. Many of these tombs have never been opened. The reasons are varied. Some are too fragile, others too remote. Entire sections are believed to be lost behind cave-ins, collapsed tunnels, or deliberate brick walls laid down centuries ago to block entry. What lies behind those walls? No one knows. Or, more provocatively, someone knows and isn't telling, because the Vatican controls access to the catacombs. Even now, in the 21st century, the Pontifical Commission of Sacred Archaeology decides who digs, who studies, and, most crucially, what gets published. Independent researchers delete unfiltered reports, rare photographic evidence of anomalies, vanishingly scarce. and anomalies there are. Over the years, whispers have emerged from insiders and visitors alike of unusual burials, non-Christian symbols, and cryptic inscriptions. Some mention sarcophagi without crosses, but with astrological carvings. Others describe frescoes showing scenes not found in the Bible: a woman raising the dead, a man holding a scroll of stars, a serpent crowned like a king. One such chamber, allegedly sealed off in the late 19th century, was said to depict a crucified figure with no face, surrounded by animals and winged figures that match no known Christian iconography. The report, published once in a fringe archaeological journal, was dismissed by church officials. The chamber itself, inaccessible, unsafe. They said, then there's the problem of missing bodies, not relic thefts, not grave robbers. Entire sections of the catacombs that show clearly labeled tombs, but no remains, as if the bodies were moved or never there. Why would the church need decoy tombs? Unless what was really buried there was never meant to be found, or perhaps never human at all. Because some believe the catacombs hold more than just martyrs and bishops. Some believe they were used to hide things: sacred texts, forbidden scrolls, artifacts too heretical or too powerful to destroy. During the reign of Emperor Diocletian, Christian writings were burned across the empire, but many texts, gospels, apocalypses, letters survived underground, literally hidden in clay jars, sealed in tombs, buried alongside saints and sinners. What if some of these writings were never unearthed? What if the catacombs still contain early versions of the New Testament or entirely unknown scriptures? And what if those texts contradict the canonical Gospels? Would the Vatican announce their discovery? Or would it quietly rebury the evidence the Church has precedent? The Dead Sea Scrolls, found in Qumran in 1947, took decades to fully publish. Vatican scholars were involved. Some scrolls, especially those with messianic prophecies that challenged orthodoxy, were delayed, withheld, or dismissed as irrelevant. And that was a find outside the Vatican's control. Now imagine what they found within their own backyard. But perhaps the most haunting mystery of the catacombs isn't what's buried, it's what was built, because the layout of the catacombs is not random, it's mathematical. Some sections align with astronomical coordinates, tunnels converge in pentagonal patterns, certain chambers echo only at specific frequencies, designed for chant or ritual. At least one hallway, according to a suppressed report, points directly toward the sunrise on the winter solstice. Coincidence or intentional design? Were the early Christians encoding cosmological knowledge into their burial grounds? And if so, who taught them? Because Christianity, as we know it, emerged from Jewish apocalypticism and Greco-Roman philosophy. But the earliest catacomb art often looks more like mystery religion iconography. Mithras slaying the bull, Orpheus charming animals, shepherd gods. What if the catacombs weren't just hiding from the empire? What if they were hiding from the church that came later? What if they were keeping alive older, more dangerous traditions? Traditions that the Vatican would eventually need to bury. Not just physically, but theologically. And what if those traditions never died? There are modern reports, strange, scattered, and hard to verify, of rites still being performed in the deepest catacombs, not by tourists, not by priests, but by orders, by groups with names like the Custodi or the Hollow Order people, who claim descent from early Christian mystics, Gnostics, or guardians of relics too powerful to display. Their existence is denied, of course, but so is half of the catacombs, and the Vatican has little incentive to confirm or deny, because these tunnels are more than archaeological sites. They are a spiritual minefield. One wrong discovery, one sarcophagus, one scroll, one fresco too heretical to explain, and the Church could find itself defending not its doctrines, but its entire historical foundation. And so silence, limited tours, carefully scripted guides, dim lighting, no wandering. And behind the velvet ropes, the real secrets, dust-covered bones, sealed niches, symbols that don't belong, and maybe, somewhere in the deepest dark, a locked chamber, one that has no name, one that has not been opened in centuries, one whose contents would change everything. We may never know what's inside, but the fact that it remains sealed is answer enough, because in the catacombs, the dead aren't the only ones being kept quiet. Next, we ascend from the crypt to the cosmos, from burial tunnels to astronomical towers, because the Vatican doesn't just look downward, it also looks up, and what it sees in the stars might explain why it's been so quiet about what's already landed. The third secret of Fatima. In the summer of 1917, the sun danced, or so thousands claimed. It was the 13th of October. A field outside the village of Fatima, Portugal. A crowd of over 70,000 peasants, journalistes, skeptics, and believers stood in the mud, soaked from rain, eyes turned skyward. Then it happened. The clouds parted. The rain stopped. The sun began to spin. It pulsed, changed colors, zigzagged across the sky. Some saw it fall. Others fell to their knees. Cries of repentance echoed. Eyewitness accounts, photographs, and even secular newspapers recorded something inexplicable. But that was just the finale. The real mystery had started months earlier. 3 children, Lucia dos Santos, aged 10, and her cousins, Francisco and Jacinta Marto, ages 9 and 7, between May and October of that year. They claimed to have seen and spoken with a luminous figure, a woman brighter than the sun, above a small holm oak tree. She identified herself only as Our Lady, and she came with messages, warnings, secrets, 3 of them. The 3 secrets of Fatima have since become a theological minefield, a conspiracy theorist's goldmine, and, more than anything, a public relations nightmare for the Vatican. The first 2 secrets were dramatic, yes, but the third is terrifying, and the Vatican has never told us the whole truth. Let's rewind. The first secret, a vision of hell. The children described a sea of fire, demons, and tortured souls, an old-school fire and brimstone apocalypse scene. Chilling, yes, but doctrinally safe. The second secret, a prophecy. It foretold the end of World War I, the rise of communist Russia, and a second, more devastating war unless mankind repented. It also included a command: consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, or risk divine retribution. This was revealed in 1941, years after the visions, but during the peak of World War II. It was timely, convenient, and useful. But the third secret, that one was locked in a sealed envelope, handwritten by Lucia, and sent to the Vatican in 1957 with strict instructions. It was to be revealed no later than 1960. Why 1960? Lucia claimed the world would better understand its meaning by then. Something, she said, would make the secret more relevant, more clear. But 1960 came and went, and the Vatican said nothing. No publication, no statement, just silence. Why? Because, according to multiple witnesses, including cardinals and Vatican officials, the secret was too explosive, too dark, too dangerous. Theories swirled. Some said it predicted nuclear war. Others, the apostasy of the Church itself. Some claimed it foretold the assassination of a pope decades before John Paul II would be shot in St. Peter's Square in 1981. The suspense only grew. People demanded answers. In 2000, the Vatican finally published what it claimed was the full third secret. In this version, the children saw an angel with a flaming sword about to set the world on fire. Mary intervenes. The scene shifts to a bishop dressed in white who is killed by soldiers on a hill outside a ruined city. Other clergy are murdered. The imagery is dark. Yes, but vague, symbolic. The Vatican claimed the bishop in white was Pope John Paul II, and the secret was a prophecy of the 1981 assassination attempt. Case closed. Or so they hoped, but many weren't convinced. Lucia had reportedly said the third secret would become obvious by 1960, yet the assassination attempt didn't happen until 2 decades later. The language in the secret released by the Vatican lacked key elements. Others had reported, where were the references to apostasy, hell, judgment? False shepherds, Cardinal Sciappi, who read the secret under Pope John Paul II, reportedly said, in the third secret, it is foretold, among other things, that the great apostasy in the Church will begin at the top. That line is not in the released version. Archbishop Loris Capavilla, private secretary to Pope John XXIII, implied there were 2 texts, one symbolic and one narrative. The narrative version, he said, contained the real threat, and that threat, according to leaks and statements by high-ranking clergy, involved the possibility that the Church itself would turn against its flock, that false doctrine, corruption, and spiritual confusion would come not from outside, but from within the Vatican. This is the part that scared them, because a vision of war is manageable, a vision of hell is orthodox, but a vision of the Church collapsing from the inside, that's radioactive. And so many believe the true third secret remains hidden. Some say it was never released. Others think it was replaced with a diluted version, and a few believe it's buried in the Vatican's secret vaults, only to be opened by a future pope when the final events begin to unfold. Lucia died in 2005, but before she passed, she reportedly said that the final secret would become clear when you see the Church on fire from within. And what are we seeing now, scandal? Division, confusion, whispers that doctrine is changing, that truths once eternal are now open to interpretation, that the shepherds don't know the path anymore. If that's not prophecy, what is? But the question remains, why won't the Vatican admit it? Why not release the full text? Because to admit the Church is its own greatest threat. To declare that heaven warned of internal collapse would shatter the illusion of infallibility. It's to admit that power cannot always be trusted, even when it wears robes. It's to concede that prophecy has teeth, and that the throne of Peter, too, can tremble. So they keep it hidden, locked in a drawer or a vault or a memory. But the truth has a strange gravity. It pulls, it leaks. And somewhere deep in the Vatican, the real words of that secret sit in silence, unread. Or worse, read and understood too well. Next, we go from prophecy to possession, from heavenly warnings to something darker still. Because the Vatican isn't just afraid of what might happen, it's afraid of what's already inside. And for that, it still performs one of the oldest, most terrifying rites in all of Christianity: exorcism. The Vatican's view on exorcism and demonic possession. For all its gilded art and theological debates, the Vatican still clings to one ancient belief with white-knuckled certainty. The devil is real, not metaphorically, not allegorically, real a conscius, intelligent evil. And it doesn't just whisper from the shadows. According to the Catholic Church, it alters people. It speaks through them. It claws its way into the material world through possession, and when it does, the Church responds with one of its most secretive, most primal rituals. The rite of exorcism, it's not just a horror movie cliché. It's a documented, sanctioned practice. There's a handbook, a ritual script, an order of operations. There are prayers and holy water. Yes, but also interviews, observations, evaluations. In some cases, teams of priests, sometimes doctors, sometimes even lawyers. And the Vatican, it doesn't just authorize exorcisms, it trains exorcists. It keeps records, and it rarely talks about it. Let's start with the basics. The Roman ritual of exorcism, the Rituale Romanum, codified in 1614, It outlines how to identify demonic possession, how to distinguish it from mental illness, and how to expel the invading spirit. The symptoms, according to the rite, include speaking unknown languages, displaying superhuman strength, aversion to holy objects, knowledge of hidden or distant things, blasphemy, and obscenity, especially during religious acts. This isn't metaphorical, this is literal protocol, and it hasn't been relegated to history. In fact, it's been updated. After centuries of silence, the Vatican revised the rite. The new version included updated theology, a more cautious approach, and an emphasis on differentiating possession from psychological disorders. But the ritual remained because the Church still believes possession happens. In fact, reports of possession and requests for exorcism have increased in recent decades. Italy alone has hundreds of trained exorcists. The Vatican even holds an annual exorcism conference, attended by clergy from around the world. This isn't fringe. This is mainstream Vatican protocol. So, what's the mystery? It isn't that the Church believes in demons, it's what it doesn't say. Because for all the official procedure, the Vatican rarely speaks publicly about individual cases. And when it does so carefully. But behind the scenes, there are stories. Stories whispered by priests, hidden in reports, buried in archives. Let's talk about Father Gabriele Amorth, chief exorcist of Rome for decades, founder of the International Association of Exorcists. By his own count, he performed over 70,000 exorcisms, not all of them full possessions, but all treated as spiritual attacks. Amorth was no fool. He distinguished between the psychological and the paranormal. He was known for his bluntness and for his stories. He spoke of victims levitating, of spitting nails, of bodies contorted into impossible shapes. He claimed the devil had infiltrated the Vatican itself, and he hinted, more than once, that the worst cases never became public, that some required multiple exorcists, that some involved hierarchy. There are rumors that certain possessed individuals displayed knowledge of Vatican secrets, things they had no possible way of knowing codes, protocols, hidden sins. One case, allegedly suppressed, involved a young seminarian in Rome who began speaking in Latin, Aramaic, and ancient Greek fluently. He named bishops who had never met him. He recited parts of the Vatican secret archives, word for word. The exorcism took weeks. No final report was ever made public. Amorth once said, "Satan is pure spirit. He can speak any language, but it's what he knows that's terrifying." Because for the Church, exorcism isn't just about healing, it's about containment. What if a possessed person speaks truths the Church doesn't want heard? What if a demon speaks in the voice of someone the Church can't publicly acknowledge? What if some possessions aren't intrusions, but revelations? Consider this. The Church believes that possession is permission-based, that the victim or someone in their bloodline opened a door through sin, through occult practice, through heresy. But what if the doors are bigger? What if there are places in the world, sacred, broken places, where evil slips in more easily? What if the Vatican itself is built on many exorcists, including Amorth, claimed that Rome was a spiritual battleground, that beneath the marble and Latin prayers, there were currents of evil, ancient, unnamed, waiting, and the Vatican knows it. That's why it keeps exorcists on retainer, why it trains new ones every year, why it never discloses the full details of major cases. Because sometimes the possessed don't just scream obscenities, they issue warnings. They speak of coming wars, collapsing structures, fire in the sky, betrayal in robes. One woman, possessed in 1988 in northern Italy, allegedly cried out during the exorcism, in perfect ecclesiastical Latin, "The fisherman's net is torn, the flock will scatter, the city of 7 hills will drink the blood of its own lambs." She had never studied Latin, had never heard of the City of Seven Hills, an ancient name for Rome. Her case was declared closed, but her words remain. So does the footage. It's said to be kept under lock and key in the Vatican's audiovisual archive, a vault containing film, audio, and photographs of rare and sometimes suppressed events, papal coronations, secret conclaves, and exorcisms. Because the Church does document them, but it doesn't share them. And the reason, perhaps, is theological, but also existential. Because if the public knew the full extent of what's been seen, heard, and fought in these rituals, the image of the Church as a bastion of serenity and stability might shatter, and worse, faith itself might change. Because to believe in the devil is one thing. To believe he's active, present, and sometimes victorious, that's harder. That suggests a universe far less ordered than the Vatican likes to preach. It suggests that evil doesn't wait outside the gates. It walks the halls, and when it speaks through human mouths in rooms dimly lit by flickering candles and watched by trembling priests, it doesn't whisper, it roars. So the Church contains it, controls it, silences it, and keeps the rest of us looking elsewhere. Secret tunnels to Castel Gandolfo. The popes are not prisoners. That's what they always say. They are the stewards of the smallest country in the world, with the biggest secret vaults, the most bulletproof glass, and the highest spiritual authority on earth. But behind those public proclamations of freedom and sanctity lies something even the devout don't often talk about: the escape plan, a hidden artery, a rumor centuries old, a passage whispered about in footnotes and late-night papal logistics meetings. The secret tunnel to Castel Gandolfo. This isn't just a paranoid fantasy or an urban legend of Rome. It's a persistent thread woven through Vatican lore. The idea that somewhere beneath the Apostolic Palace or behind the Swiss Guard checkpoints, there lies a hidden tunnel, possibly miles long, that connects Vatican City to the papal summer residence nestled in the hills outside Rome, Castel Gandolfo, the papal retreat, the safe haven. Historically, the place where popes go to rest or to disappear. And, according to some, to survive. Let's set the stage. Castel Gandolfo is located about 25 kilometers, roughly 16 miles, southeast of Vatican City, overlooking Lake Albano. The estate itself is sprawling gardens, villas, orchards. For centuries, it was a closely guarded, highly private papal residence, built on land once belonging to the Roman Emperor Domitian. The popes used it as an escape from the summer heat, from political pressures, and, during times of war, from literal bombs. During World War II, it became a refuge. The villa reportedly housed hundreds, if not thousands, of refugees. The Vatican's extraterritorial status protected it from occupation. But how did they get there? Publicly. The popes used convoys, automobiles, later helicopters. There's even a helipad on the property. Now, but from the very beginning, there have been whispers that the popes had another route, an underground one. Here's where the mystery begins. First, the timeline. The earliest rumors of a tunnel between the Vatican and Castel Gandolfo date back to the 17th century. That's when the papacy began expanding its holdings at the villa. Construction records from that era reference extensive subterranean fortifications. The language is vague, possibly on purpose: vaults, foundations, storage. But architects of the time spoke in euphemisms when dealing with the papacy. Fast forward to the 20th century. In 1929, the Lateran Treaty established Vatican City as an independent, sovereign state. Along with that recognition came the reaffirmation of extraterritorial rights to several properties outside the walls of Vatican City, including Castel Gandolfo. These rights meant the estate was technically Vatican soil. Despite being miles away from Rome, it also meant that the Vatican could build or dig without informing the Italian government. Think about that. A sovereign state with the right to build secret infrastructure below Italian land. and answer to no one but itself. Now consider this. The Vatican has tunnels. This is not theory. There is the Passetto di Borgo, a medieval elevated passage connecting the Vatican to Castel Sant'Angelo. It was used by Pope Clement VII to escape the sack of Rome in 1527. That passage is visible, walkable, and well documented. If the Vatican had an escape route in the 16th century, why wouldn't it build another in the 20th? Especially during an era of global war, fascist regimes, nuclear threats, and growing unrest within the church. Here's what the theorists say. Some insiders claim that sometime between the 1930s and 1950s, under the pretext of infrastructure expansion and villa restoration, the Vatican began construction of a deep-level tunnel system, shielded from aerial reconnaissance and radiation, a rail or roadway, fortified and hidden, connecting Vatican City to Castel Gandolfo, beneath layers of soil, stone, and state secrecy. Too far-fetched. Consider this. The Vatican has its own train station. Yes, just inside its walls, near the Vatican Gardens, sits a small but functional railway terminal. It's mostly used for ceremonial or limited freight purposes today, but it connects to the Italian rail system. Where does that rail line go? One branch leads south, in the direction of Castel Gandolfo. Now, the official explanation is that the railway was built to deliver goods and ceremonial guests. Pope John XXIII once took the train for a pastoral visit, but suppose there's another track one, not on the maps, one that leads underground. Whispers of such a route have emerged from various sources over the decades. Construction workers, estate caretakers, even former Swiss guards. An anonymous 1989 interview with a Vatican maintenance technician claimed that a high-level emergency tunnel did exist, complete with an electric cart system, air filtration units, and reinforced exits. None of this is confirmed. No one has shown blueprints, but then again, no one is allowed to. The Vatican is not just a religious institution, it's an intelligence operation. It has its own diplomatic corps, its own security services, its own archivists and censors, the kind of people who are trained to keep things quiet. And if the existence of a tunnel system is part of an emergency protocol, something meant only for wartime or papal evacuation, it would be kept on a strictly need-to-know basis, which might explain why it's never been publicly acknowledged. But the Vatican is no stranger to secrets. And this particular secret isn't just about escape, it's about continuity. Because what if the tunnel isn't just for the Pope? What if it's a vaulted lifeline for the Church itself? A way to move people, documents, objects, sacred relics. What if it's the backbone of a contingency plan? Imagine a scenario. War breaks out. Rome is under siege. Vatican City is no longer safe. Within hours, the Pope disappears, not through the front gate, not by air, but underground, through a tunnel buried beneath centuries of dirt, lined with reinforced concrete, and adorned with nothing more than holy silence. He emerges 16 miles away at Castel Gandolfo. From there, he broadcasts a message, continues the Mass, holds the line. The Church doesn't fall. It relocates, unbroken, eternal, and invisible. That's the power of a tunnel like this. But here's the part that truly stokes suspicion. Castel Gandolfo was closed in 2016 after centuries of use as a papal retreat. Pope Francis opted not to spend summers there. He opened it to the public as a museum, but the estate is still guarded, still maintained, still partially restricted, and if the tunnel exists, the infrastructure remains waiting, sleeping. So what is it for? Why keep it functional? Why keep it quiet? One answer, because it's too useful to dismantle. And another, because the myth itself is power. The idea that the Pope could vanish and reappear miles away, that's security, that's psychological deterrence. And maybe that's the truth. Because the Vatican, for all its candles and crucifixes, is a fortress. And fortresses need escape routes. The pagan roots beneath St. Peter's Basilica. You don't build a holy empire without burying something first. That's not a metaphor. It's architectural truth. Foundations must be dug, ground must be broken. And in Rome, eternal, layered, and blood-soaked building, anything sacred means disturbing the bones of the profane. Which brings us to the holiest structure in Catholicism, St. Peter's Basilica, a monument to the glory of God, to apostolic succession, to the idea that one man, Peter, the rock, died here, was buried here, and now, 2,000 years later, rules from beneath marble and gold. But dig a little deeper, literally, and the story gets murkier. Because beneath the basilica, beneath the Christian necropolis, beneath the mosaics and relics, there's something older, something pagan. And the Vatican doesn't like to talk about it. Let's start with the ground. Vatican Hill, one of the 7 hills of ancient Rome, was originally a burial site, an area outside the city walls, on the wrong side of the Tiber, the kind of place Romans used for tombs, shrines, and cults that didn't quite fit inside the civic order. It wasn't a glamorous location. It was a place for the dead and for venerating what existed before, long before Peter, before Jesus, before the rise of monotheism. This hill held sacred significance. Archaeological evidence confirms that Vatican Hill was once a Roman necropolis, filled with mausoleums, family crypts, and ornate pagan altars. These weren't silent graveyards. They buzzed with activity, intricate carvings, sacrificial, rites, and dedications to deities like Mithras, Cybele, and Saturn. Here's the uneasy truth. When Emperor Constantine embraced Christianity and started building the first basilica around 324, he didn't choose the site by chance. He selected it because it was already holy. Legend holds that Peter was crucified in Nero's circus nearby and buried in haste. His grave marked by followers, yet no Roman records from the time verify this. No inscriptions, no official documents, just oral stories. What Constantine saw was a chance, a pre-existing sacred space, a burial ground pulsing with spiritual weight, even if it wasn't Christian. So he built. The old necropolis was partly covered, partly repurposed. Mausoleums were leveled, shrines defaced, and stones from pagan tombs likely reused in the basilica's early structure. This was standard in the empire. Christianity didn't erase paganism. It absorbed it. That absorption still lingers in the basilica's foundations. Let's talk about Mithras. The Mithraic Mysteries were a dominant cult in Rome during the early centuries, focused on Mithras, a sun deity born from stone who slew a cosmic bull. The cult was practiced in secret underground temples and shared eerie parallels with Christianity, a divine intermediary, a sacred feast, themes of death and rebirth. Mithraea, their sanctuaries, were often constructed underground, near cemeteries, or within repurposed tombs. And guess what? Traces of a Mithraeum have been uncovered near the Vatican necropolis. Coincidence or deliberate continuity? By building his church over a Mithraic site, Constantine wasn't just claiming land, he was co-opting a rival faith, planting the cross atop a place already steeped in spiritual resonance. It was a masterstroke of rebranding, one the church has meticulously maintained. Fast forward to the Renaissance, when the current basilica replaced Constantine's original. Excavations unearthed dozens of pagan tombs. Some were left untouched, others quietly removed or reburied. In the 1940s, under pressure from historians and growing academic interest, the Vatican began formal digs. What they found was undeniable. A tomb, bones later attributed to Peter, but also pagan inscriptions, altars to philosophers, not saints, images of Orpheus, not Christ, and prayers to forgotten gods. One striking discovery was a mosaic of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, his rays radiating in precise geometric patterns, encircled by stars. Its imagery mirrors later Christian depictions of Christ as ruler, coincidence, or adaptation. Christianity didn't arise in isolation. It borrowed the architecture, symbols, and spatial logic of the pagan world. It supplanted. That's not blasphemy. It's history. Early Christians repurposed temples, reframed statues, and transformed pagan festivals, Saturnalia, solstices, dies natalis into Christian feasts and liturgical cycles. Beneath St. Peter's lies more than a grave. It's a palimpsest, a spiritual canvas, written layer upon layer, each visible if you dig deep enough. The Vatican permits limited tours of the necropolis, but only along designated routes to specific tombs. The tour stops where the church decides. No straying, no questioning why a marble sarcophagus depicts a figure with torches and a serpent instead of a cross, or why another tomb features carvings of Helios, Selene, and the zodiac. Speculation is discouraged because the official story must hold. This is Peter's church, holy ground, and anything beneath that challenges or complicates, that is misunderstood, misplaced, or buried deeper. Yet the stones don't forget, nor do the symbols. Just as Christian basilicas often echo the proportions of Roman civic halls by design, not chance. St. Peter's reflects the ancient logic of sacred spaces. Build where the divine feels close, where rituals once summoned gods, where offerings were given. Some believe this energy persists, that the pagan roots of Vatican Hill still hum beneath the altar, not just sanctified, but saturated. Some argue this ancient residence is the source of the site's power. Not only Peter's relics, not only tradition, but the echo of older deities whose names are lost, but whose presence endures. If true, if the basilica is a Christian monument atop a pagan energy source, perhaps the Vatican knows. Maybe that's why it guards the archives, limits access, and leaves some tombs unexcavated, not out of doctrine, but out of caution. Caution that beneath the Christian narrative lies an older, primal story, still alive beneath the marble. Next, we shift from graves to manuscripts, from ancient ruins to hidden knowledge, because the Vatican doesn't just conceal the past, it sometimes locks it away in books. The Vatican's role in lost ancient texts. Some books shape history, others are buried by it. Some fade through time, lost to decay, conflict, or neglect. Others, it's said, were deliberately hidden, not by accident, but by intent. If even a fraction of the rumors hold true, the Vatican isn't merely a keeper of sacred texts. It's the guardian of a forbidden library. Let's be clear, the Vatican Apostolic Library is the world's largest ecclesiastical collection. It's not just shelves of old Bibles. It's a maze of manuscripts, letters, codices, apocryphal writings, commentaries, and artifacts amassed over 1,600 years. Officially, it holds about 1,100,000 printed books, 75,000 codices, and over 8,000 incunabula books printed before 1501. But that's only what they disclose. Next to the library lies something else. The Vatican Apostolic Archive, once called the Vatican Secret Archive, a secure repository of scrolls, volumes, and parchments, off limits to the public and not open for casual exploration. Access is granted only to approved scholars, with precise requests, under tight surveillance, with strict rules and consequences. Even then, only a portion is available. What's in the rest? That's the question. Somewhere within those 53 miles of shelves, behind coded doors and rules older than most nations, there are said to be texts that could unravel everything. Let's discuss the Apocrypha, ancient religious writings excluded from the Bible, not for being false, but for being inconvenient. Some described alternative accounts of Jesus' life as a child, a mystic, or a deeply human figure. Others spoke of Lilith, Enoch's celestial travels, or Gospels by Mary Magdalene. Thomas, or Judas, the Gospel of Thomas, for instance, portrays Jesus not as a sacrificial savior, but as a guide to secret wisdom. No crucifixion, no resurrection, just hidden knowledge. Gnostic and radically inclusive. The Gospel of Judas goes further, casting Judas not as a betrayer, but as the trusted disciple who fulfilled Jesus' divine plan. These texts didn't vanish by chance. They were debated in councils, banned by edict, burned in public, but not all were destroyed. Some were preserved in secret. The Dead Sea Scrolls, found in 1947, unveiled a world of Jewish mysticism and messianic prophecy that dwarfed early Christian history. Vatican scholars were among the first to study them, controlling what was translated, published, or revealed. Then there's Nag Hammadi. Uncovered in Egypt in 1945, a set of 13 leather-bound papyrus codices filled with Gnostic writings. They spoke of hidden truths, a divine spark in humanity, and a flawed creator god. The Vatican condemned these texts, but did it also hide them if similar manuscripts were found earlier during the Crusades? In Rome, in Alexandria, where are they? If texts were seized during the sack of Constantinople in 1204, where did they go? If Jesuit explorers brought back manuscripts from Asia, Africa, or the Middle East, were they studied or sealed away? Here's where the mystery deepens. The Church has had centuries to collect unorthodox, heretical, or pre-Christian texts, and the Vatican Archive is the perfect place to make them disappear. We know they keep secrets. In the 1600s, when Giordano Bruno suggested an infinite universe with other suns and planets, he was declared a heretic and burned at the stake. His writings were confiscated, his notes archived. When Galileo was tried for claiming the Earth orbited the Sun, his papers were seized, suppressed, and filed away. These are just the known cases. How many others remain silent? Rumors persist shared by rogue historians, dissident monks, even a whistleblower cardinal, that the archive holds an unedited Book of Enoch, the lost prophecies of the Sibyl, said to have foretold Christ but banned after Rome's fall. A full Gospel of Mary, detailing Jesus' teachings on reincarnation and the soul's afterlife journey, or ancient texts describing pre-Adamic civilizations, human-like beings. Before Eden, there are whispers of Atlantean scrolls, allegedly found in Egyptian ruins, describing a lost world with divine kings and celestial origins, all hidden, not because they're false, but because they're perilous. Knowledge is power, and the Church has long mastered the art of controlling it. In the 900s, the Vatican forged the Donation of Constantine, a document used to justify the Pope's rule over Western Europe. It took nearly 600 years to expose it as a fraud. If the Church could fabricate power, would it not also suppress truth? Some claim the archive isn't just a repository, but a weaponized vault of history texts that could challenge the resurrection, the virgin birth, or Christ's divinity. Even in the digital age, the Vatican remains cautious. Only a sliver of the archive is digitized. Only select documents are translated, and vast sections, especially pre-13th century materials or anything contradicting the official narrative, stay restricted. The stated reason: preservation, fragility, context. The real reason: some truths are too dangerous. Some truths could topple systems. Some truths, once read, cannot be forgotten. What if a papyrus claims Jesus was married? What if a tablet predates Genesis by thousands of years and tells a different creation story? What if a scroll suggests the crucifixion was symbolic, or that heaven and hell are mental states, not places? What happens to faith, to doctrine, to authority? This is the Vatican's bind. To fully open the archive risks the narrative. To keep it sealed fuels suspicion. So it remains a twilight realm, physical, cataloged, yet unknowable, a paradox of marble and dust, perhaps the most potent library in history, because within those pages may lie not just the story of what was But what was meant to be erased, the Vatican's independent time zone, time is a construct. A calendar is a tool of control. Clocks mark the intersection of faith and power in a world ruled by hours, minutes, and seconds. It's easy to overlook that time was once sacred, governed by priests, astronomers, and rulers for nearly 2,000 years. No institution has wielded time more carefully than the Vatican, yet there's a subtle detail most overlook, a small quirk in the global system of timekeeping, a faint ripple in the standardized web of time zones. Vatican City, a 44-hectare sovereign enclave, operates on its own time, unofficial, obscure, but precisely maintained. Like all enigmas tied to the Vatican, this isn't merely about ticking seconds or shifting minutes. It's a saga of authority, sacred ritual, and the extraordinary measures a spiritual empire takes to stand apart from the relentless march of modern history. Let's start with the basics. On paper, Vatican City synchronizes its clocks with Central European time, the same as Rome. This alignment makes sense geographically, politically, and practically. It ensures seamless coordination with the surrounding world. But beneath this surface, conformity lies a deeper, more elusive truth. Within the ceremonial heartbeat of the Vatican, time operates on a different plane, an ecclesiastical rhythm, a papal cadence, sometimes entirely detached from the world's rigid schedules. What does this mean? It means that while the Vatican adheres to standard time for diplomacy and logistics, it maintains an internal timekeeping system, rooted not in the precision of atomic clocks or solar cycles, but in the ancient pulse of ritual, the tolling of sacred bells, and the personal decisions of the reigning pontiff. In essence, time in the Vatican can flex, twist, and bend in ways that defy secular logic. Consider the Angelus Bell, a daily ritual where the Pope leads a prayer traditionally at noon. Yet, this moment isn't always fixed. Sometimes the Pope speaks at 4 minutes to 12, other times at 4 minutes past. The bells might ring slightly early or linger a moment longer than expected. This isn't an error, it's deliberate. In the Vatican, time molds itself to the Pope's will, not the reverse. As the successor to St. Peter, the vicar of Christ, the Pope holds a unique power. When he speaks, schedules shift, clocks pause, and the faithful wait. This practice isn't just logistical, it's theological, rooted in the very foundation of Christian timekeeping. The Church didn't merely adopt the calendar, it crafted it. In 1582, Pope Gregory XIII revolutionized time with the Gregorian calendar, correcting a 10-day drift in the Julian system to ensure Easter aligned with celestial events. This wasn't a minor adjustment. It was a bold assertion of authority. With a single papal decree, the Pope reshaped the world's perception of time. Some nations resisted Protestant countries, like Britain didn't adopt it until 1752, but the message was unmistakable. Rome dictates the rhythm of days. That dominion persists. Within Vatican City, time isn't just measured, it's mandated, a sacred act of sovereignty. This control manifests in myriad ways. The Swiss Guard change posts on a ceremonial schedule that follows not Greenwich Mean Time, but the ancient cycles of the liturgical year. Priests and officials observe a sacred daily rhythm, reciting prayers like lauds at dawn, vespers at dusk, and compline at night, rituals that predate modern time zones by centuries. At the Vatican Observatory, astronomers track stars and planets, not just for scientific inquiry, but to align feast days, holy seasons, and lunar cycles. With the Church's calendar, even the Pope's private moments are steeped in this sacred temporality. His masses reportedly follow a papal hour, chosen not by convenience, but by spiritual instinct. Whispers abound unverified, naturally, of a peculiar clock in the Apostolic Palace, tucked away in a papal chamber, set 10 minutes ahead. Why? Because a pope is never late. He arrives when divine timing decrees. This isn't just folklore. It's a reflection of a system where time bends to the pontiff's presence. This mastery over time shapes Vatican protocol. Take Holy Week, the pinnacle of the Christian year. Easter's date isn't fixed, but calculated through an intricate interplay of the vernal equinox and the first full moon. A formula so ancient and esoteric, it demands expertise in both mathematics and theology. Who validates this cosmic equation? Not modern observatories or digital algorithms, but the Vatican's scholars and astronomers. The Church doesn't just observe time, it legislates it, reinforcing its role as the arbiter of sacred moments. This independent temporal framework underscores a profound truth. No other entity on Earth, like the Vatican, its time isn't about precision or punctuality. It's about sovereignty. While the Vatican issues its own currency, prints its own stamps, and raises its own flag, it also claims its own clock. Even if outwardly aligned with Europe's, beneath this facade lies a deeper tradition. Time as a theological construct, a sacred domain where the divine intersects with the human. This temporal philosophy is woven into the Vatican's very architecture. Clocks adorn Vatican City, yet they rarely align perfectly. In St. Peter's Square, two grand timepieces frame the basilica. One displays standard Roman time, anchoring the Vatican to the secular world's rhythm. The other, used for papal events and liturgical ceremonies, operates on a ceremonial schedule that may not match. Sometimes they sync, often they don't. This isn't a flaw, it's a deliberate design. The Church exists beyond time, moving at a pace that defies modernity's obsession with seconds. The Vatican's time is cyclical, not linear. Days loop, rituals recur, and the liturgical calendar weaves through seasons of penance, celebration, sorrow, and renewal. Even death doesn't stop the clock, it resets it. When a pope dies, time pauses. The fisherman's ring is destroyed. The Swiss guards stand down. The clocks are adjusted for the sede vacante, the interregnum between pontiffs, with the white smoke of a new conclave. A new era begins. Not an inauguration, but an installation, as if rebooting a divine system. Why does the Vatican guard this temporal autonomy so fiercely? Because time is power's first illusion. By bending time, the Church asserts control over perception, ritual, and reality itself. This control elevates it above worldly turmoil. Empires crumble, revolutions flare, but the Angelus bell still tolls, perhaps at 3 minutes past noon. And that deviation is sacred. It's a reminder that the Vatican operates in a realm apart, untouched by secular chaos. By crafting its own sacred time, the Church carves out a space where divine order prevails, even as the world outside shifts and fractures. Next, we pivot from the intangible mechanics of time to the tangible mysteries of the unexplained. Sometimes, truth doesn't lie in texts or rituals. It hovers overhead. On one peculiar day, in 2007, something extraordinary appeared above the Vatican, a glowing, orange presence that defied explanation. For a fleeting moment, the heart of Catholicism confronted the unknown. The unexplained orange disk, UFO sighting of 2007. It lingered silently, radiant, observing an orange disk suspended low over the most heavily guarded square of land on Earth. A vivid burst of color against the somber dome of St. Peter's Basilica. It was no ordinary sight. No proclamation followed. No clarification was offered. Just a pulse of light and a city frozen in awe. The year was 2007. The place, Vatican City. For a brief, unrepeatable moment, the sky parted, not with visions of angels, but with an unidentified flying object. This wasn't some remote desert or obscure rural field. It was the spiritual and political nexus of over 1 billion Catholics. A fortress of faith secured by centuries of tradition, secrecy, and vigilance. Yet it was visited by an object no one could officially identify. What elevates this event, beyond a mere anecdote, is the credibility of the witnesses. This wasn't a lone observer or a fanciful tourist. Multiple people, including journalists, reported seeing the disk, describing it in strikingly consistent terms. A luminous orange sphere, gliding, slowly, silently, then vanishing abruptly. The Vatican's response: absolute silence. No statement. No. Rebuttal. No. Acknowledgement in the enigmatic logic of the Holy See. This silence speaks volume. When it comes to the unexplained, the Vatican doesn't dismiss. It observes, documents, and, if needed, conceals. To grasp the significance of this event, we must explore the Vatican's relationship with the cosmos. The Vatican operates 2 observatories, one near Rome, another in Arizona, partnered with American astronomers. This isn't a recent endeavor. The Vatican Observatory, established in the late 1500s, is among the world's oldest astronomical institutions. Founded to counter claims of anti-scientific bias, it signaled the Church's embrace of the stars. Yet beneath this scholarly facade lies a deeper fascination, not just with distant galaxies, but with what might visit Earth. UFOs aren't typically Vatican business, but when one appears glowing and silent over your sovereign state, it demands attention. The timing of the 2007 sighting adds intrigue. That year, the Vatican faced turmoil, financial scandals, abuse allegations, internal rifts. Was the disk's appearance a coincidence, a cosmic warning, or something else? Some speculate the Vatican knows more than it reveals. Rumors among UFO researchers, Vatican observers, and even former clergy suggest the Church has maintained a confidential archive on extraterrestrial phenomena since at least the 1940s. Some accounts claim Pope Pius XII was informed about the Roswell incident, not by governments, but by Jesuit astronomers in the Americas. In these narratives, the Vatican wasn't a passive bystander, but an active, discreet participant in studying the unknown. Why would the Church care? Because confirmed contact with non-human intelligence would pose a theological earthquake. Or would it? In 2009, Father José Gabriel Funes, then director of the Vatican Observatory, made waves by declaring that belief in alien life doesn't conflict with Catholic faith. He stated, "The possible existence of extraterrestrial life does not contradict our faith, because we cannot put limits on the creative freedom of God." This wasn't a dismissal, it was an invitation, suggesting the Church is open to integrating such a revelation. This raises a chilling question. Was the 2007 sighting an isolated event or part of a larger pattern? Could the Vatican, behind its guarded archives and calculated silence, be preparing its followers for a truth, not of solitude, but of cosmic company? Whispers persist of a secret papal encyclical drafted under Pope John Paul II, but never published, outlining the theological ramifications of extraterrestrial contact. Some call it too revolutionary. Others say it awaits the right moment. Back to the disk itself. What was it? No official images surfaced. No flight logs were shared. No data emerged, yet the event occurred. Witnesses described it hovering low, rotating gently, emitting a subtle hum. Felt more than heard. An Italian journalist, present for a Vatican press event, called it a mechanical eye without a form. A priest reportedly remarked, "It seemed to watch us, waiting. It didn't move like any machine I know. Too fluid, too intentional." Others proposed it wasn't physical, but a projection, a spiritual or technological phenomenon, or a blend of both. The Vatican's refusal to engage: no press release, no debunking, no investigation, only fueled speculation. This wasn't the first sighting, nor the last. Less documented claims speak of glowing figures near the Vatican gardens, brief power surges, or subtle shifts in security protocols. Without evidence, these remain rumors. But that's precisely The Vatican's strategy: ambiguity is power. By neither confirming nor denying, the Church keeps the narrative open, the questions unresolved, mystery. When wielded well, outshines certainty. So, what was the orange disc? A test flight? A visitor? A celestial glitch? We may never know. But it left an imprint not in headlines or archives, but in the minds of those who witnessed it, and in the Vatican's resolute silence. Even at the heart of faith, there are watchers, and not all are divine. Next, we descend from the heavens to the earth, from aerial enigmas to mysteries carved in stone. Beneath the Vatican lie places untouched by light or cameras, where time itself seems to pause. Among them are catacombs, miles of shadowed tunnels, and a curious riddle in plain sight: the vanishing obelisks. The Vatican claims to deal in truth, not illusion, grounding itself in stone, relics, and unwavering tradition. Yet, within the precise geometry of St. Peter's Square, under the basilica's looming shadow, lies a visual puzzle that has baffled visitors, cholas, and architects for centuries. It's not inscribed in ancient texts or whispered in Latin. It's hidden in the open, disappearing before your eyes. The obelisk at the heart of St. Peter's Square is no mere decoration, a towering Egyptian monolith. It stands with mathematical exactitude, encircled by stone rings and framed by Bernini's colonnades. This isn't a replica, it's an authentic relic of ancient Egypt, transported across seas, erected by emperors, and claimed by popes. Yet, from certain vantage points, it vanishes entirely, not slowly, not through a trick of light, but instantly gone, leaving only sky. Some call it an optical illusion, a clever interplay of architecture and perspective. Others believe it's an intentional design, a hidden message for those who know where to look. This isn't the only obelisk in Vatican City. Several exist, each with a story. Their journey from pagan Egypt to imperial Rome to the heart of Christendom is a tale of conquest, symbolism, and coded power, one that reveals the Vatican's mastery over the visible and the unseen. Let's begin with the towering centerpiece of St. Peter's Square, the Vatican obelisk, standing over 25 meters tall and weighing an estimated 326 tons. This ancient monolith is no mere ornament. Crafted in Heliopolis, Egypt, around 2,500 years before Christ, it was likely a tribute to the sun god Ra, a symbol of divine radiance frozen in stone. Centuries later, Emperor Caligula brought it to Rome, erecting it in the central spine of his circus, an arena for chariot races, spectacles, and brutal executions. Tradition holds that this very spot witnessed the crucifixion of St. Peter, the first pope, with the obelisk looming as a silent sentinel over his martyrdom. Today, this relic of pagan devotion stands at the heart of Christianity's most sacred plaza, transformed from a symbol of ancient worship into a cornerstone of the faith. Yet, it's more than a static monument. It's alive in an architectural and symbolic sense, pulsating with meaning woven into the Vatican's grand design. In 1586, Pope Sixtus V orchestrated the obelisk's relocation to its current site, a feat that was as much a ritual as it was an engineering triumph. 40 winches, 900 laborers, and 70 horses were marshaled under the direction of architect Domenico Fontana, who chronicled the endeavor in a detailed, illustrated manuscript. This wasn't a simple move, it was a ceremonial act, steeped in spiritual significance. Fontana positioned the obelisk at the precise center of Bernini's elliptical colonnade, a layout driven not by aesthetics alone, but by sacred geometry. The colonnade forms a vast ellipse, a shape rich with symbolic weight, representing unity, eternity, and the cosmos. In geometry, an ellipse has two focal points, but the obelisk isn't placed at either. It sits slightly off-center, aligned with a subtle stone disc embedded in the pavement, often overlooked by visitors. Stand on this disc, and the 4 rows of columns align perfectly, collapsing into a single visual plane, like a curtain drawn across the square. From this exact spot, the obelisk vanishes from view, not gradually, but entirely, swallowed by the architecture's optical sleight of hand. It's as if the stone dissolves into the sky, leaving only absence. This vanishing act is architectural brilliance, no doubt. But is it merely that obelisks were never just decorative? In ancient Egypt, they were cosmic conduits, frozen rays of sunlight, linking Earth to the divine. Aligned with celestial pattern, they marked sacred sites, believed to channel spiritual energy. When Rome conquered Egypt, it didn't just plunder these stones. It co-opted their mystique, repurposing their power for imperial glory. The Vatican, with its deep engagement with astral symbolism, evident in its calendar reforms, feast day cycles, and even zodiac-inspired mosaics, chose to anchor a pagan obelisk in its holiest precinct. Why was it a bold declaration of triumph over paganism? A Christian conquest of ancient gods? Or was it something more nuanced, a continuation of the obelisk's sacred role, now serving a new faith? The Vatican didn't demolish these monoliths. It preserved them, restored them, and integrated them into a web of symmetry and light. The obelisk in St. Peter's Square doubles as a solar marker at noon on the equinox. Its shadow aligns with specific stones, creating a celestial clock. This isn't happenstance. The square is a timepiece, a calendar, a cosmic map. Some theorize the obelisk's placement taps into ley lines, hypothetical energy currents said to connect sacred sites across the globe. Others suggest it forms a metaphysical axis with St. Peter's Dome, a vertical bridge between heaven and earth, channeling divine energy. Whispers persist of a hidden chamber beneath the obelisk's base, sealed since its arrival in Rome, a tomb, a relic, or a vault from its Egyptian origins. The 1586 relocation was steeped in ritual. Pope Sixtus ordered an exorcism performed as the stone was raised, as if purging it of its pagan essence. Why an exorcism? Did he believe the obelisk carried a spiritual imprint, energy, memory, or something more? The vanishing effect adds another layer. What if it's not just a visual trick? What if the precise alignment where the obelisk disappears also marks a moment where its power is neutralized or amplified? Is it a portal, a vial, or a coded message? A silent sermon delivered not in words, but in absence. The Vatican's mastery lies in repurposing symbols, not erasing them. The Egyptian ankh becomes the Christian cross, the solar disk morphs into the Eucharistic host, and the obelisk transforms into a monument to Peter's sacrifice. Yet, when it vanishes, so does certainty, reminding us that even the most enduring symbols can flicker, depending on perspective. This pattern of transformation runs deep. The layout of Vatican City echoes ancient sacred cities, concentric, hierarchical, axis-bound. The obelisk is a pivot, a fulcrum, around which the Vatican's narrative spins. Its disappearance challenges the illusion of absolute control, suggesting that truth, like the stone, can slip from view. This brings us to another enigma, one steeped in legend and longing, the Holy Grail. The tale is familiar. A cup, a carpenter, a final meal, blood, divinity, betrayal, and an object lost to time, pursued across ages by knights, mystics, rulers, and dreamers. While others chase shadows, one institution has remained still. Its vaults, a silent sentinel. The Vatican. If the Holy Grail exists, not as metaphor, but as a tangible relic, where else would it rest but beneath Rome? In the labyrinthine archives, guarded by the world's most powerful church, the Grail's story begins with an idea, not an object. In Christian lore, it's the chalice used at the Last Supper, later catching Christ's blood at the crucifixion. A vessel of divine mystery, linking the mortal to the eternal. But the legend is older, more complex. In Arthurian tales, the Grail isn't always a cup. It might be a stone, A dish, or a glowing chalice that speaks or hovers. Its form shifts, but its essence remains a bridge to the divine for the Vatican. Built on this very concept, the Grail is more than a curiosity. It's a potential keystone. The Church doesn't flaunt this interest, but behind sealed doors, the quest for the Grail is no mere myth. It's a mission. If found, the Grail wouldn't be just another relic. It would be proof of the Last Supper, the crucifixion, a physical tether to Christ's life. Such a relic would wield unmatched power, capable of reshaping faith and authority. The Vatican already houses countless relics, saintly bones, fragments of the true cross, even a piece of Mary's veil. But the Grail is different. Rumors swirl that it was discovered centuries ago, not by a gallant knight, but by a humble monk, passing not through Templar hands, but through the quiet stewardship of Benedictines, Franciscans, or Jesuits. Some say it rests in a nondescript wooden box, sealed with wax, hidden in the Vatican's archives. One thread of this tale points to the 12th century, when Crusaders returned from the Middle East with tales of a miraculous cup held by a secretive sect. It was said to heal, glow, or hum in prayer's presence. The Templars, those enigmatic warrior monks, became fixated, excavating beneath Solomon's temple, scouring libraries in Antioch, and searching tombs in Edessa. When the Templars were crushed in a purge, backed by the French crown and tacitly approved by the papacy, some believe they concealed the Grail before their fall, placing it where no one would dare look. Or perhaps the Vatican claimed it, absorbing what it couldn't control. As it has done before, Grail stories proliferated in later centuries. Spain, Scotland, and France each claimed their own, with Valencia's agate cup, complete with medieval inscriptions, and a 4th century paper trail among the strongest contenders. Yet none bear the Vatican's endorsement. A telling silence, the Church authenticates relics with rigor, demanding provenance and proof. Why not validate a candidate? Perhaps because the true Grail already lies within its vaults. Obscure Vatican catalogs mention an artifact labeled Ritus Sacri, Vas Sacramenti. No image, no details, just a red seal and restricted access. Could this be the Grail, studied in secret by theologians and scientists? If the Vatican possessed the authentic cup, verified by carbon dating and linked to relics like the Shroud of Turin, the consequences would be seismic. It could cement Catholicism's supremacy, ignite interfaith conflicts, draw millions to pilgrimage, or shatter skeptics' doubts. Such power explains why the Vatican might conceal it, waiting for a moment when the world's balance demands its revelation. The mystery deepens with whispers of a second Grail, not a vessel, but a text. Medieval letters and coded Templar dispatches hint at a book, a manual of divine resurrection, detailing how Christ manipulated life and death. Such a scripture would dwarf the Gospels, revealing not just teachings, but methods, secrets too potent for public knowledge. Could this be the Vatican's true Grail, translated in the shadowed crypts beneath Rome? The Church's silence fuels speculation. Its observatory was partly founded to study stars tied to Grail myths. Jesuits excavated sites linked to the legend, and papal envoys have quietly explored regions from Glastonbury to Ethiopia. Each mission ends in silence. No confirmation. No denial. Just a file marked Vas Sacramenti. Is the Holy Grail a cup, a relic, a concept, or the missing piece in the Vatican's mosaic of faith, power, and cosmic enigma? The answer, like the obelisk, may vanish depending on where you stand.